Every person has a soul. One day, people learned that the soul has its own essence, anima. Sometime later, they learned to manifest it in the form of various abilities. But not everyone had a strong anime. Due to the emerging distribution of ranks, people whose anime was too weak began to be despised. Since E rank was the lowest stratum of society, such people were treated the worst. Schools became a tool for raising the status of the country. During military operations, people with the highest ranks were sent to the front lines. The school where our main character studies is no exception. Students with strong abilities often chose to be bullied to prove their superiority. But today, Michael and his friends were unlucky to choose a goal that was too tough for them. Jumping up, John created a huge iron axe. Smiling, he quickly approached Michael. The guy himself froze in place. He was amazed that his opponent was stronger than he had expected. Coming to his senses, he created a tanfei in each hand to hold off John's attack. The next moment, the iron axe collided with the iron tanfas, making a characteristic sound. Due to the oppressive force of the enemy, it was difficult for Michael to remain in this position for too long. He turned to Ethan, standing to the side, wondering why in such a situation he was just watching everything. Our hero was in no hurry to answer Michael. However, a couple of seconds later, scratching the back of his head, he said that he could not help him in any way. These words angered Michael even more, and he promised that he would definitely deal with him later. The next day, Michael, as promised, decided to deal with his unlucky classmate. He asked how long Ethan was going to continue causing problems for them. He hated even the thought of someone so weak being in their class. Our hero apologized, saying that one cannot expect anything from someone who is in last place. His words infuriated Michael. Gathering all the strength in his fist, he was about to hit Ethan, hoping that he would die and go to hell, but our hero managed to safely dodge. He said that wishing for death was too harsh, so he asked whether it would be enough to simply admit his guilt. Sean, who was standing behind Michael, began to roll up his sleeves, saying that Ethan should get 10 hits for each member of their team. Sighing, the hero realized that he would be beaten throughout the break. Therefore, he had no choice but to flee. Other classmates laughed as they watched this scene. However, Ethan failed to escape from his classmates. He was surrounded at the exit of the classroom. One of the guys said that using abilities at school is prohibited, so Ethan shouldn't even try to oppose them with anything. Immediately after this, our hero received a strong blow to the chest. Others watched Ethan being beaten, saying that F rank deserved only such treatment. They honestly didn't understand why someone like him would even come to school and disgrace their class. Slowly getting up from the floor, Ethan said that it wasn't his fault that Michael's team lost. Sean was about to hit our hero once again, wondering how Ethan dared to contradict them so brazenly. At that moment, the door opened and their class teacher, Mr. Thomas Reed, entered, announcing from the threshold that he had good news. Because of the teacher's arrival, Sean and Michael had to leave Eton and return to their places. Noticing that Mr. Reed was too joyful today, the students asked what was the reason for this. Someone shouted out the assumption that their teacher was finally getting married. Our main character managed to get up from the floor during this time and sit down in his place. Thomas could see that the hubbub in the classroom wasn't going to stop anytime soon and got everyone's attention by slamming his fist on the chalkboard, telling everyone to listen carefully. After that, everyone fell silent, and he said that their school had been awarded by the state. Glenn suggested that they had once again received some stupid offer from a dubious organization. When he asked how long they would continue to participate in something like this, the teacher came up to him and said that it was not he who decided this, and that they should just accept what was happening. Mr. Reed said it was all down to the achievements of the senior students. Afterwards, he returned to the board and said that from that day on, the school was becoming a site for combat exercises, so all students would be divided by military rank. Everyone listened carefully to their teacher, amazed that the school actually agreed to this. Meanwhile, Mr. Reed continued, saying that from this moment on, his charges become comrades in arms. He also said that all the teachers had been given a rank, so now he should be called the commander of the 10th platoon. Glenn asked what would happen to the students in the future. The man replied that there would most likely be many people willing to take on graduates of this school, after which he said that they needed to make every effort to attract someone more influential to their side. Ethan asked what would happen if one of the students did not want to be a military man. Mr. Reed looked at the guy who asked him the question for a few seconds, taking his time to answer, after which he said that no one is forced to become a military man against his will. If someone does not want to take part in this, then they should send a request for transfer to another school. The man said that Ethan should carefully consider the possibility of a transfer presented to him, because he himself understands his situation. The hero was about to answer something, but he was interrupted. Classmates sitting in front demanded from Mr. Reed an explanation of the reason why their school was turned into a military school so suddenly. Taking a box from the table, the teacher replied that he had mentioned earlier that the 11th graders had performed well. Emptying the contents onto the desk, Mr. Reed explained that they were the ones who helped give the school military status and all received the rank of sergeant. The next moment, everyone saw on one of the desks a lot of student tickets where the rank was indicated. Patting one of his students on the shoulder, Mr. Reed said that 11th graders are the hope for a bright future for their country. Handing out a ticket to everyone, the teacher said that only the best of his charges would receive the rank of corporal, all the rest, the rank of lance corporal. After handing out tickets to everyone except Ethan, he announced that the platoon leader could reevaluate rank at any time. Our hero turned to Mr. Reed to ask a question, but the man ignored him, continuing his speech. Ethan made another attempt to ask why he was not given a ticket. With his back to him, Mr. Reed said that in the entire school, there was only one student who could not achieve the rank of private. What we heard greatly surprised our main character. Turning to him, the teacher said that Ethan would just be a loser. The hero was not at all happy with his new title, which foreshadowed even more bullying from his classmates. After class, Mr. Reed called Ethan to his staff room. Looking through the documents, the man said that they should discuss Ethan's future. He admitted that he would not be able to pull out such a hopeless student and suggested that the hero change schools. The guy was shocked that he was offered to change schools. Looking at the documents, the teacher explained that even ordinary studies were not easy for Ethan, and if we talk about military training, he simply could not withstand the load. Ethan said that if Mr. Reed helps him unlock his potential, then there is a chance that he will succeed. After his words, the man looked at the guy in surprise. The next moment he laughed, saying that Ethan had a good sense of humor. The hero was unpleasant to realize that the teacher first paid attention to him only to laugh. After calming down, Mr. Reed said that the rank system would make it even more difficult for Ethan to survive in this school, and as a teacher, he couldn't help everyone. After these words, the hero's assumption that Mr. Reed was aware of all the bullying was confirmed, and it became obvious that he simply did not want to have an F-rank student. It was also not difficult to understand that the man secretly hoped that the constant insults would force Ethan to give up. He asked the teacher his opinion about whether souls could be divided by rank. The man was amused by his question, the answer to which was too obvious, of course. Souls are also divided by rank. After receiving the teacher's answer, Ethan clenched his fist. Looking at Mr. Reed, he said that he did not agree with this statement. As soon as the break was over, the teacher and our hero returned to the classroom, where he said that since the classes were now divided into squads, each sergeant must report attendance. Turning around, Anna counted everyone who was in her squad and reported that there were 10 people in the first squad and there were no absentees. Next was Michael. He said that there were 11 people in his squad with no absentees. Watching them, Ethan could not understand what all these army games were for. Mr. Reed asked the remaining third squad to report. Raising his hand, Glenn asked if that was all, to which the man said that he needed to follow the orders of his superior. Sighing, the guy replied that the total number of people was 10, 2 were missing, and 1 was a loser. Leaning back in his chair, he summarized that there were 8 people in his squad, which caused laughter from his classmates. All eyes were turned to Ethan, who was now not even considered human. The hero was already accustomed to various kinds of bullying, so he simply ignored all the ridicule in his direction. The teacher also did not attach any importance to this and announced that today, instead of lessons, there would be an event on the field. He said that government intelligence officers are hiding in the school, but even the teachers don't know where exactly. They will watch how the students react to such sudden changes. Mr. Reed was interrupted, asking him to get to the point. Sighing, the man said that battles would be held among the school students. All teams were distributed by the administration. Eliza said with disappointment that if only 11th graders fight among themselves, then their class will no longer be interesting to anyone. Ethan, on the other hand, was glad that he could pass the time watching the fights. Suddenly, Mr. Reed clarified what rank Glenn's ability was. The guy answered irritably that he had a C rank. Afterwards, the man asked what rank his fighting abilities had. Questions about his strength irritated Glenn, and he asked why so many questions, because even without them, it is obvious that he can defeat anyone. Mr. Reed approached his ward, and placing his hand on his shoulder, said that in this case his first battle would be against the 11th graders of the first squad. Realizing who he had to fight with, the stunned Glenn jumped up from his seat. Mr. Reed, meanwhile, told everyone except the third squad to go to the field, after which he said that Glenn's squad had 20 minutes to prepare. Everyone began to leave the classroom, wishing the third squad good luck. Glenn did not know what to do, because it was obvious that they would not be able to stand against high school students, who all received a high rank. Besides this, there was another factor that irritated him greatly, namely the fact that there was an F rank on his team. Rising from his seat, he walked towards Ethan, who was calmly lying on his desk. A couple of seconds later, Glenn stopped next to him. Rising from his desk, our hero asked what Sergeant Glenn needed. Glenn grabbed Ethan by the hair, saying that this manner of communication infuriates him. As he approached, he said that if the hero did not want to get punches in advance, then he should change his manner of speaking. Glenn then tosses Ethan aside, saying that the team they will be fighting has a real monster, Antonio. He said that it was difficult to defeat him even with joint efforts, but this time Ethan takes the place of a normal warrior, so the result of this battle is already obvious. With incomprehension, the hero asked, "Since they will lose anyway, then what good is he to them?" Glenn grabbed Ethan by the tie, asking him if he understood the difference between shame and ordinary defeat. Then he touched our hero's forehead, saying that if he goes down in ranking, then only Ethan will be to blame. Turning away, the hero replied that Glenn's rank was not so high as to worry about it. Containing his irritation, Glenn sank down next to Ethan, saying that now he couldn't even beat him well because he was needed on the battlefield. Smiling, Ethan asked what difference does it make who ends up getting hit in the head. Looking at his classmate, Glenn said that he would assign him one simple task, after which he sat down next to Ethan, asking if he could handle it. The hero replied that he would do whatever he was ordered. Having received his answer, Glenn grabbed Ethan by the vest. He said that Ethan would become his human shield. A few minutes later, the third squad was in full force on the field. Before starting, Mr. Reed checked the functionality of the microphone. A couple of moments later, he announced the start of fighting between squads. The teacher announced the leaders of both detachments, between whom a battle would be fought any minute. Although Glenn took Ethan as his shield, he had a bad feeling. Approaching the leaders, Mr. Reed asked if their troops were ready to begin, and they nodded in agreement. The man turned to Antonio, telling him to show everything he could do today. Looking to the side, he explained that government intelligence officers were watching them today, so they couldn't make a mistake. Antonio replied that his squad would do everything possible. After this, it was announced that the teams needed to take their starting positions. Glenn's squad did not even count on victory in this battle. It seemed to them a waste of time. When all the participants stood opposite each other, Mr. Reed announced the start of the battles, and he also announced that the leader of each squad should receive a bracelet. Glenn grabbed Ethan by the vest, telling him to follow him. He put the bracelet on our hero's hand, saying that this will help him last longer, because the bracelet uses the owner's strength for protection, but breaks from a powerful blow. It was also announced that, according to the rules, the one whose bracelet broke is usually eliminated, but due to the difference in the experience of the teams, a change was made to the rules. Ethan asked if he had to be held by the shirt like a cat, to which Glenn irritably replied that he should silently fulfill his role as a shield. Meanwhile, Mr. Reed announced that the victory would be counted towards the team that could hold out for 5 minutes. For Glenn's team, this change did not make the situation any better, because none of them would be able to withstand their opponents for that long. Immediately after this, Ethan set the timer on his watch. Looking at the teacher, he thought that if his team won, they might once again reconsider his transfer to another school. A couple of moments later, the leaders greeted each other. Mr. Reed then gave permission for the fight to begin. Glenn immediately grabbed Ethan and pulled him along. He rushed behind his comrades, hiding from his opponents. The guy hoped that in this way he would be able to hold out for these 5 minutes. As Antonio's squad began to advance towards them, one of the squad members asked what their formation was. But moments later, no orders had come from their commander, leaving everyone confused and unsure of what to do as the enemy began to surround them. Glenn shouted for everyone to shut up and just protect him. He must hold out for the specified time for them to win. The next moment, Olivia kicked the opponent in front of her in the stomach, incapacitating him. Antonio also went on the attack. In a matter of seconds, Olivia managed to defeat several opponents and collect their bracelets. When the girl looked towards Ethan and Glenn, the latter was overcome with real horror. The next moment, she ran towards them. Glenn pulled Ethan even closer to him, telling him that he had to stop Olivia and protect him by any means necessary. The hero suggested running in the opposite direction to gain time. When he looked to the side, he saw the teacher smiling. The man said that he would help him change schools. This infuriated our hero, so he broke free from Glenn's grip, standing in front of the approaching girl. When she was far enough away, he grabbed her hand, surprising Olivia. However, the next moment, she materialized armor. A couple of moments later, her entire body was covered in armor, hiding a bracelet underneath. With enthusiasm, Ethan said that this armor is perfect for Olivia. Her abilities are not only unimaginably strong, but can also create something so beautiful. The girl interrupted him, telling him not to make a fool of himself, because he was not as weak as he wanted to seem, since he kept up with her. In response to her words, he pointed at Glenn, saying that his leader was running away. While Olivia turned her attention to Glenn, Ethan checked the time on his watch and saw that there were still a full 3 minutes left. He tried to figure out how he could hold out all this time. When the girl turned to him again, he asked if he could call her sister. Judging by Olivia's lack of reaction, Ethan assumed that she didn't like the proposal and suggested that they might just be acquaintances. The girl told the hero to stop stalling for time and reveal his ability. Ethan did not know where to go and tried in any way to get Olivia to talk, which began to significantly irritate the girl herself. She again demanded that Ethan reveal his abilities. He seems much stronger than his comrades. The hero asked her not to rush things. He said that she must be well aware of the importance of consistency, especially when meeting new people. Olivia could no longer listen to his empty chatter and began to approach the guy with a murderous aura. Noticing her changed mood, Ethan said that he would reveal his ability to her. The next moment, a dull glow began to appear in his palm. Olivia froze, waiting to see what would happen next. Contrary to all her expectations, a small F-rank dagger materialized in his hand. She stared at the dagger for a few seconds, occasionally glancing at Ethan. Then she sighed heavily, running her hand over her face. When Olivia asked if Ethan was the F-rank loser, the guy nodded, confirming her guess. She was overcome with great disappointment. Despite everything, Ethan himself was proud of the dagger he created, saying that it was no worse than an S-rank weapon. When the guy noticed that the girl turned around and headed in the opposite direction, he called out to her. Ethan screamed that she couldn't just leave when she insisted so hard on seeing his ability. The Kopek piece ignored him and walked on. He made another attempt to stop her, shouting that if she didn't stop, he would sneak up on her from behind and attack. Olivia turned around, saying that she didn't see the point in wasting her time on an F-rank loser. However, something happened that she did not expect. In a matter of seconds, Ethan was behind her with his blade raised. In surprise, the girl froze in place, watching the blade approaching her. At the last moment, she put her hand in front of her, blocking the attack. Olivia watched as the blade slid across her armor, leaving a small scratch in its wake. Smiling, Ethan said that his dagger was really sharp. Our hero's classmates, who were watching this scene, laughed, saying that Olivia was afraid of some weakling who could not even inflict any damage on her. The girl said that even though Ethan's reaction speed is not bad, but with a rank like his, it will not help him. Then she turned around, saying that she saw everything she wanted. Looking at her retreating back, Ethan thought that he managed to buy a little more time. However, when he looked at his watch, he saw that only 1 minute had passed, and he needed to hold out for 2 more. Olivia at this time was approaching Glenn, who was backing away. Stepping back, he said that it was better for her not to approach him. But the girl ignored his words and quickly appeared next to him, asking if he could prove to her that he was better than Antonio. At the same moment, Glenn noticed a nearby stone. He was happy about this and thought that this was a great chance, because there were quite a lot of stones here. Olivia asked what exactly Glenn was going to do to prove his superiority. Glenn replied that since she was so interested, he would be happy to show everything, after which he sat down and touched the ground, activating his ability. Olivia didn't understand what he was doing. Ethan, on the contrary, understood everything perfectly. He realized that Glenn had been hiding his real rank all this time. Our hero called out to Olivia, warning her that her opponent's technique was too dangerous. Glenn himself used extraction on one of the stones sticking out of the ground. A couple of seconds later, the guy towered over the girl, standing on a huge stone. Looking at Olivia, he said that the most interesting part of the show would now begin, after which he used the swing ability, which allows you to use the extracted object as a weapon. Everyone watched what was happening in amazement. Olivia guessed that all this time her opponent had been running away, looking for a suitable stone for his ability. The next moment, he lifted the stone on which he had just stood upward, as if it weighed nothing. Then he threw it at the girl. He said that with this attack, he would get rid of Olivia and prove his superiority to everyone. Glenn was so carried away by his fantasies that he did not notice someone else's presence behind him. The next moment, he was attacked by Antonio, pinning him to the ground. Glenn shouted that sneaking up on an enemy from behind is for weaklings. Turning his attention to Olivia, who had managed to build a shield that prevented her from colliding with the stone, Glenn realized that she was stronger than he had expected. Suddenly, the stone in front of her broke into many small pieces. Afterwards, the girl saw Antonio in front of her, who broke the stone with his ability. Looking at him, Olivia said that this was her opportunity to show herself, and he shouldn't interfere. The guy replied that it was too dangerous, and his duty was to protect his subordinates. Looking at him with displeasure, Olivia asked if he really thought that she herself could not cope with this situation. Antonio replied that he was firmly convinced that the girl would have done a great job herself. But the problem was different. Looking behind him, he nodded towards Glenn, who was rushing at him with a club, and said that this guy would not calm down so easily. Using his ability, Antonio instantly found himself behind Glenn and attacked him, throwing him over himself onto his back. Ethan, standing to the side, watched what was happening with interest. Suddenly, Antonio turned his attention to him, which made the hero tremble. Ethan shouted that he was giving up. He really didn't want to fight someone like Antonio. The guy who approached asked why Ethan warned Olivia about the danger before Glenn attacked. The hero replied that their sergeant can sometimes overdo it without thinking about the consequences. Continuing to approach, Antonio said that Ethan did not know how to lie at all. He, in turn, retreated back, recalling that a couple of seconds ago he had given up. However, Antonio ignored him and stood next to Ethan, intercepting his hand with the blade. The hero of the hands, due to such an unexpected attack, released the weapon from his hands, pointing it upward. But the next moment the dagger was already on the right, and he grabbed it with his free hand. Ethan swung it at his opponent. Antonio had no choice but to let our hero go. After that, he jumped back to a safe distance. He stared at Ethan, studying him. Taking a defensive stance, Antonio asked who he really was. Ethan replied that he was an ordinary warrior from the 3rd Squad of the 10th Platoon, with an F-rank ability. Antonio wanted to say something, however. At that moment, our hero's attention switched from the enemy to the wristwatch, which showed that he could hold out for only 1 minute. The guy asked what Ethan was looking for there. Instead of answering, our hero scratched the back of his head and laughed awkwardly. Then he pointed towards the stands, saying that there was a crowd there that was just waiting for Ethan to make another mistake. Antonio realized that his opponent was simply playing for time and said that he hated people like him most of all. When he asked why Ethan didn't at least try to win, the hero backed away from the guy, asking what he could do on his own. Antonio said that it was advice, not a warning. Ethan asked if there was any point in that, since he was only an F rank. Antonio said that at the end of the battle, the scouts would choose the worst ones and send them to other schools. After his words, the hero began to approach his opponent, saying that he did not want to go to another school. When Ethan stopped, he said that he could not guarantee Antonio that he would remain alive, since he had become his opponent. Immediately after this, a red aura began to surround our hero. It seeped out of his body, filling the surrounding space. The system reported that Ethan's physical indicators had tripled, and he could also see not only the level of someone else's ability, but how it worked, as well as its weaknesses. Ethan's condition will only return to normal if the opponent dies, or his soul essence is completely destroyed. The true ability of our hero is the skill of perfect execution with the enemy, which has an S rank. All this time, Antonio remained in place, observing the changes that were happening to the guy opposite. He assumed that the low-grade dagger was just a part of the manifestation of his true ability. Turning his attention to Antonio, Ethan saw that the opponent's ability was only a B rank, which was that he could catch any target. Antonio was shocked when our hero said that his ability was not as outstanding as he previously thought. The guy realized that he needed to be careful with Ethan, since he was able to see the abilities of other people. Meanwhile, the hero, surrounded by an aura of murder, pointed a dagger at the enemy, saying that he could no longer endure and hold back. He asked if Antonio could stop him. Without waiting for an answer from the enemy, he again asked whether he could cope with this task. Feeling completely superior to his opponent, Ethan changed his position. Rotating towards in one hand, he waited for Antonio to make his move. Classmates watching this did not understand why those two were just standing there. Michael, who was starting to get annoyed by this, shouted at Antonio to go on the offensive because he had come to watch Ethan being beaten. Antonio himself tried to determine how best to approach his opponent. Although our hero was not in a protected stance, he did not have any open areas to strike. Olivia also felt this strange aura coming from Ethan. This guy no longer looked like the loser he seemed to her at first. Looking at him, she felt fear. She tried to get her emotions under control, realizing that they had to help Antonio, and ordered everyone to attack Ethan. The next moment, everyone ran to carry out her order, attacking the enemy, but he deftly avoided them. Surrounding the hero from all sides, Olivia finally managed to reach Ethan. The next moment, our hero found himself pinned to the ground by Olivia. Dissatisfied with what happened, Antonio asked the girl why she did it. She replied that she was also obliged to protect all members of the squad in which she was a member. Antonio said that he did not need anyone's protection. Olivia's words about whether he was sure of this made him think. When the girl attacked him, the guy quickly left the line of attack. He also avoided a trap set by other members of the squad. It all looked more like a cat playing with its prey. Adjusting his tie, he replied that he wasn't sure he could really handle Ethan on his own. Noticing the shadow of a smile on Antonio's face, Olivia was shocked and did not hear his words that she had better dispel her ability before she got hurt. The next moment, her armor collapsed and began to disappear, causing the girl to fall into bewilderment. The others also didn't understand what was happening as they watched as their bracelets began to break without any reason. When Ethan noticed Antonio's gaze on him, he said that they had great teamwork. However, the guy still continued to gaze intently at the hero, causing him to be wary. Sighing, Antonio asked if Ethan had come to his senses. Ignoring this question, our hero turned to Olivia, saying that 5 minutes had already passed and they should get off him. Turning around, Antonio said that next time no one would bother them. Ethan replied wearily that once was enough for him. However, Antonio ignored him, advising him to practice a little before their next meeting. With doom in his voice, Ethan shouted after the departing guy that this time was enough for him, and there was no point in them meeting again. But he was again ignored. Following their sergeant, the rest of the squad members hastened to leave the field. Left alone, our hero tiredly sank to the ground. The shocked Mr. Reed announced the result of the battle, which was hard to believe. Glenn's squad won. At the same time, an important conversation took place in the director's office. Director Roger handed over to his guest the documents that he had previously requested. Taking in his hands a stack of documents containing students' personal files, he came across a recently revealed 11th grade student, Antonio. Patrick noted that in middle school, he did not have a single award, but in high school, all the victories were his. After reviewing all his data, he concluded that he was only able to get this far thanks to his rank. While studying the affairs of other students, his attention was drawn to the fact that one of the students had an F rank. He asked Principal Roger for details about this student. The man replied that Ethan had the lowest rank. After much discussion, they had to place this student in the combat class. Patrick was interested in this student. Turning the sheet over, he saw that there was a more detailed description, but the director said that it was not worth reading. In the special circumstances footnote, it was stated that Ethan lost his parents at age 8 and was unable to awaken his abilities due to shock, then suffered bullying from other relatives, and at age 10, he awakened his ability when the family was burgled. Something about this alarmed Patrick, because usually all children awaken their abilities at the age of 8. Previously, he had not encountered other cases where the awakening of a child's ability manifested itself later due to any circumstances. Patrick asked if Ethan's fighting abilities had changed since Ethan's awakening, and the headmaster replied that when he arrived at school, he still had an F rank. Something about this guy's case haunted him, and Patrick began to suspect that Ethan might be deliberately hiding his power. Putting the stack of documents aside, he said that he would like to meet the student in person. The director was surprised by such a request, and he hastened to say that Ethan would soon change schools due to his low rank. Afterwards, the man asked why it was decided to introduce military training into this particular school. Hearing this question, Patrick froze. Faced with his guest's warning glance, the director became frightened, thinking that he had asked a question regarding a secret government project that was not supposed to be discussed. He apologized, saying he shouldn't have asked that question. Looking at the affairs of the two students who caught his attention, Patrick replied that they were preparing for attacks from the north, and the system he introduced will help students change and become stronger. Every morning of our hero began the same way. He woke up exactly at 6 in the morning, after which he begins to get ready for school. In front of the mirror, he tells himself that today will be a good day, and at 6:30 he leaves the house. Because he was given cleaning duties, he has to go to school so early. This morning at the entrance, he met other students who had come to school at such an early hour. Rumors about what happened yesterday spread throughout the school, so Ethan's name became on everyone's lips. Grinning, the girl said that most likely Antonio's team simply lost their vigilance yesterday, since they lost to someone like that. They couldn't believe that some loser had defeated the 11th graders with an ordinary dagger. Upon arriving at his class, Ethan washed the board, then brushed the chalk off the brushes, thinking that it would be better if they hung regular marker boards. Having finished with this, the hero moved on to washing the floors not only in the classroom, but not in the entire corridor. A little later, Michael and Sean approached him, the latter saying that Ethan's attempts to do at least something had benefited their team. Putting his hand on the hero's shoulder, he said that he managed to greatly surprise everyone that day. Sean admitted that they didn't expect anything from Ethan back then, but somehow they all managed to come out on top. After that, he left the class. At the next break, Glenn approached him. Ethan thought that now they would start beating him again. However, contrary to his expectations, a classmate asked our hero to get him some math handouts. Ethan was surprised that they weren't going to beat him up. He thought that because of what happened on the field, then they stopped bullying him. The next day, students from parallel classes also began to approach him with various requests, such as doing their homework for them. Even though the bullying against him stopped, they began to use him for their own purposes, which exhausted our hero much more. When the lesson ended, Mr. Reed asked no one to leave. He reminded everyone that today is the last day to join the unit. For 10th graders, this was mandatory, and there was no way to avoid it, so the teacher hurried his students to make a choice. Ethan thought for a long time about what he should choose and whether he would be taken anywhere at all. Mr. Reed said that a separate conversation would be held with those who did not choose anything. Everyone in the class started laughing at Ethan, saying that no normal unit would accept an F-rank fighter. Our hero did not give any importance to their words. However, when he read the list of units offered to him, the former calm disappeared and was replaced by horror. All units on the list are directly related to the army or the use of the ability. Many have already decided where they want to go and even split into groups. Michael was no exception and immediately headed to the selected unit to submit his application. Ethan was left alone in the class, not deciding where he should enroll. He had already studied the proposed list several times, but our hero did not see a solution to the current situation. Suddenly, he noticed that in one of the divisions, there were no restrictions on ranks. There was also no interaction with abilities. It was only intended for the development of physical abilities. Ethan decided to sign up here because he assumed it would only be regular physical training, and there wouldn't be a lot of people. True, the hero found it strange that one unit was given an entire gym, while others had to be crammed into smaller rooms, which caused dissatisfaction among some. When he approached the gym, he was surprised by the huge number of people crowded at the entrance. Ethan thought he had come to the wrong place. He looked at the sheet that indicated the location of the unit he needed to make sure it was the right place for him. Suddenly, someone from the crowd shouted that there was an F rank, turning everyone's attention to Ethan. Having examined everyone, the hero realized that almost everyone here was from the 9th grade. He didn't understand why they had gathered here because they didn't have to join the unit. As everyone shouted in excitement that the leader was coming, Ethan moved closer to see who they were talking about. The next moment, he realized who exactly they were calling the leader and decided that he needed to leave here immediately. Antonio noticed Ethan's face among the crowd and walked towards him. Due to constant pushing, our hero was unable to get out of the crowd. He was accidentally pushed towards the approaching guy. Confronted with him, Ethan asked in confusion if Antonio was the leader of the training unit. He nodded, saying he didn't expect to see Ethan here. Our hero was convinced that he needed to get out of here as quickly as possible. He did not want there to be a fuss if they fought with him in front of so many witnesses. This did not escape Antonio's keen eye, and he asked Ethan where he was going. The hero replied that he was mistaken and had come to the wrong place. Ethan promised that he would go look around here and immediately return when he found the office he needed. To his words, Antonio replied that there was nothing else nearby. He looked at Ethan for a few seconds, after which he expressed his assumption that he had come here in the hope that there would not be many people here. The hero admitted that this was indeed the case, but too large a crowd had gathered here, so he changed his mind about entering here. Antonio replied that it was not so easy to get into his unit, so Ethan need not worry about a large number of participants. But even with these arguments, our hero refused, recalling that his abilities are too insignificant. The unit leader had no choice but to force our hero inside. Heading to the middle of the hall, Antonio said that he would now conduct an entrance test, which Ethan would take along with everyone else. Taking a quick glance at everyone who wanted to join here, he was surprised that more people than usual had gathered today. Then he announced that the testing would consist of simply repeating a couple of exercises for Antonio, namely 30 burpees, 30 push-ups, again 30 burpees, and 30 squats. When Ethan heard that only one who could complete 10 approaches would be able to pass, he thought it would be easier to die than to fulfill this condition. A few minutes later, the daredevils from the first group were already exhausted, performing only the third approach. Some were unable to continue and decided to give up. They chose this unit because they thought it would be easier to get into than the others, but this turned out to be far from the case. Ethan watched from the sidelines, realizing that he had made a huge mistake in coming here. Looking at Antonio, who performed all the exercises he listed without difficulty, without even slowing down for a second, the hero understood why he was called a monster. Looking at the other side of the hall, the hero could only sympathize with the exhausted students. A couple of minutes later, stopping on the fourth approach, everyone gave up, unable to even stand up. After announcing that the first group had dropped out, Antonio turned around, announcing that testing of the second group would now begin. After his words, everyone recoiled from the guy in horror, confident that they would definitely not be able to cope with this impossible task. The girl standing next to our hero pushed him forward, saying that he would go first. This left only Ethan in front of Antonio while the others stepped aside. Turning to the guy standing opposite him, the hero asked if Antonio was really human, because he wasn't tired after doing so many approaches. Looking at Ethan, the leader of the unit said that he should not try to stall for time like that time on the battlefield. Then he turned to those who decided to sit on the sidelines and said that the second group could begin doing the exercises, ignoring all dissatisfied objections. A couple of minutes later, while doing the exercises, Ethan's mood changed regarding this introductory task. At home, he often trained on his own so that he could defend himself. Although the hero thought that he was pretty good at sports, training face-to-face with Antonio awakened his competitive spirit. But unfortunately, our hero's reserve of stamina was far from that of his opponent. At some point, Antonio said that the second group was stronger than the first, so he decided that they should speed up a little. Ethan was sure that this guy took pleasure in tormenting other people in such a terrible way. After a minute passed at an accelerated pace, everyone except Ethan decided to give up and were now just watching what was happening. Seeing how our hero performed approaches on a par with Antonio, they could not believe that his abilities really had an F rank. Our hero did not intend to give in to his opponent, so he performed exercise after exercise, fighting his irritation towards Antonio. The leader of the unit himself was not even out of breath, calmly performing the exercises at a given pace. One of those watching lost count of which approach they were already performing. The girl sitting next to him suggested that the seventh had already gone. Hearing this, others began to support Ethan, recognizing that he was not as bad as they said he was. A smile also appeared on Antonio's face. He thought that it was not in vain that he had noticed this guy on the day of the battle. Ethan himself was already at the limit of his strength. Continuing with the exercises, Antonio said he was confident that the hero's reaction time that day was not just a coincidence, but that his well-developed stamina helped him maintain his pace. After these words, Antonio accelerated again, challenging Ethan. The hero could not believe that his opponent seriously decided to do this. Many thought that competing with a newcomer at such a speed was too cruel even for Antonio. But when they saw that Ethan was doing everything on par with the leader, they were very surprised. The second group began to support our hero, shouting that there was only a little time left and he would succeed. As he completed his final set, Antonio complimented Ethan on his excellent work. The next moment, joyful screams were heard in the hall. Having completed all the exercises, Ethan wanted to lie down and not get up. This pace was not usual for him. Congratulations poured in from the outside on the successful completion. He sank to the floor, thinking that since he was praised, then everything turned out not so bad. Standing next to him, Antonio extended his hand to Ethan, saying that he had been accepted into the training unit. Grabbing the offered hand, the hero thanked the guy and said that this was enough for him. Picking him up from the floor, Antonio said that Ethan could come here to train starting tomorrow. Trying to pull his hand away, the hero repeated again that what he received today was more than enough. Approaching him closely, Antonio said that training together was much more effective, and besides, he had been waiting for a suitable opponent for a long time. Ethan replied that if he had completed just one more approach, he would have died, and also reminded that Antonio is annoyed by people like our hero. Ignoring all his words, the guy slowly said that it took him a whole year to find a member for his unit. Ethan realized that he was completely unheard, and there was no point in arguing with Antonio. A few days later, our hero stayed after school to clean the classroom. He sighed heavily, thinking about the fact that he didn't want to go to training today. Ethan still couldn't believe that he actually ended up in Antonio's unit, despite the fact that he absolutely did not want to encounter him ever again. Because of this, everyone's attention was now focused on our hero, which he did not like very much. Every day, everyone began to tease him about his chosen unit. Some were jealous and tried to find out how he got to Antonio. Ethan tried several times to get out of training, but it turned out to be useless, because in such cases Antonio did not leave our hero alone for a minute. For a moment he considered breaking his arm, but he quickly dismissed this idea, realizing that even so Antonio would not leave him alone. Lost in thought, Ethan did not notice that there had been someone else in the class all this time. When the hero finally paid attention to the stranger, she asked him if he was studying here. Ethan nodded and asked what was wrong. The next moment, she took out her student card with a title, saying that if she was not mistaken, then in this school it is customary to greet her this way. Ethan was surprised when he learned that this girl already had the rank of corporal. Alicia asked what the title of our hero was, but he hesitated to answer. Noticing this, she demanded his name and rank in a commanding voice. Ethan immediately reported that he had been awarded the rank of Rookie of the 3rd Detachment of the 10th Platoon. Only then did he realize that he had answered her without thinking, because they had been forced to memorize it many times. Looking at Ethan, Alicia was surprised that he was just a newbie. After she extended her hand, saying that she was glad to meet him, the hero returned her handshake and asked what she was doing here. Alicia replied that starting tomorrow she would join the ranks of the 10th Platoon. After receiving her answer, Ethan smiled, saying that he hoped they would get along in the future, and then headed out. He said he still had work to do, so he had to go. Before Ethan could open the classroom door, Alicia grabbed his backpack and pulled him back. Then she pushed him against the wall. Ethan watched in surprise as the girl approached him and blocked his escape route. The hero said that he really needed to go. Looking into his eyes, Alicia said that first he should show her the school. Ethan had no idea what to do in such a situation, especially since Antonio could come here at any moment and then he would not be able to escape. The hero made another attempt, saying that he was in a hurry and she should look for someone else, but the girl stood her ground, answering that Ethan suited her perfectly. He realized that today was an extremely unlucky day, and he would not be able to get away from either Alicia or Antonio. Approaching Ethan a little more, the girl said that he should show her the school immediately. Sighing, the hero asked where she wanted. Alicia asked him to take her to Sergeant Antonio. The hero could not help but be pleased by such a successful coincidence of circumstances. He hoped that since he was busy because of Alicia, Ethan might be allowed to go home. He replied that he was just heading to Antonio. At the same moment, the object of their discussion appeared outside the door, clearly in a bad mood. The leader of the unit opened the door, making Ethan startled at the sudden appearance. When he asked if our hero had thought about skipping today's training, Ethan replied that he was just going to it. Alicia turned to the guy who came in, asking if he was Sergeant Antonio. He replied that she should communicate more respectfully with elders. The girl said that the distribution of ranks prevails here, rather than age. Approaching him closely, she asked if his rank was higher than hers. Without waiting for his answer, Alicia pulled away from Antonio, saying that they were about the same level. Loosening his tie, he asked if she wanted to make sure. Ethan noticed their belligerent attitude and asked them not to start a fight right there. Suddenly, Alicia switched the topic, asking if Antonio had a girlfriend. The guy replied that there was no one. Smirking, Alicia said that this is quite obvious. She is also very annoyed by such types as Antonio. He replied that in this regard their feelings are mutual. Then she took a couple of steps back, saying that he should come up with something for decency, be it a girl or a bride. When Antonio asked what Alicia was talking about, the girl replied that her family was quite conservative, so for his own safety, it was better for him to listen to her advice. Ethan, standing on the sidelines, had absolutely no idea what was going on, or what the relationship was between these two. Having lost interest in Antonio, the girl switched to our hero, asking if he wanted to date her. Ethan was surprised by such a sudden question from the girl. He asked why him. She replied that they were the same height, and she liked it when the interlocutor's gaze was on the same level as her. Confused, Ethan replied that it was too sudden and he needed to think, surprising Alicia with his reaction. For some time, she just stood there looking at the guy. Afterwards, the girl smiled, saying that he was embarrassed and looked quite cute. Approaching him, she asked what rank his ability was. Hesitating, Ethan replied that he had an F rank. Alicia backed away from him, saying he was lying. The hero replied that he was telling the truth. Taking a step forward, the girl said that such people simply do not exist. Antonio intervened in their argument and reminded him that it was time for Ethan to go to training. He asked the girl to leave so that he could pick up his ward. Sometime later, our hero was completing the last set of pull-ups. Seeing that Ethan's body was already trembling, Antonio said that he was only staying for the last time. When the hero sank to the floor in front of Alicia, the girl admitted that she thought that their training was just an excuse. But, to her surprise, the guys were actually playing sports all this time. Turning to the girl, Ethan asked her for help, since she decided to follow them. The girl replied that she did not see the need for it. The hero was amazed that only recently she demanded to show her the school, and now instead she is watching their training. Pointing to Ethan, she asked why Antonio was training with him. He replied that the guy was an ordinary beginner whom he decided to help, because for him, physical characteristics are more important than rank, and he had also been looking for a suitable partner for a long time. The girl smiled, guessing that the real reason was not so simple. Approaching Antonio, she said that she did not understand why waste her time on him, only if he did not see some potential in Ethan. The guy tensed after her words. Alicia asked him to tell her what Ethan was hiding. After what she saw during this training, the girl was sure that Ethan's abilities were much higher than just F rank. Antonio replied that he knew nothing. Alicia realized that it would be difficult to extract any information from him. Then she decided that it was best to ask Ethan himself about it. Lying on the floor, the hero replied that the girl was very mistaken about him. He was just a useless F-rank newcomer. From his answer, it was too obvious to Alicia and Antonio that this was a lie, but they could not do anything about it. Sighing, the unit leader grabbed the hero by the shirt, saying that there was plenty of time to rest and they needed to continue training. The next day, Mr. Reed announced that there was a new student in their class. Looking towards the door, he told the girl that she could come in. A couple of seconds later, a smiling Alicia stood in front of the whole class. Everyone looked at her with interest, because it was the first time someone had been transferred to them. Alicia turned to the teacher, asking where her place was. The man replied that she was sitting on the horse with the first squad, but first she needed to introduce herself. Having determined where Ethan was sitting, the girl replied that she liked the third squad and headed in his direction, ignoring the teacher's objections. Walking past the rows, Alicia asked to be placed in the third squad. Ethan and his seatmate watched the new girl in bewilderment. Pointing to her neighbor Ethan, Alicia said she wanted to sit there and asked to switch seats. The guy replied that this was his place and he did not intend to give it up. The girl didn't like his answer. Hitting the desk with her hand and leaning towards the guy, she asked if he really didn't want to change seats, adding threatening notes to her voice. He had no choice but to give her his seat. When the girl took her new place, one of the guys called out to her. Glenn asked displeasedly who she thought she was to allow herself to do such a thing. Smiling, she asked if his rank was really higher than hers, after which she said that she knew that among the students, the highest rank was corporal, and she was precisely a corporal. Glenn stated that he was the leader of the squad, but the girl no longer listened to him, telling the teacher that she would sit here. Mr. Reed approved of this new girl's arbitrariness. Alicia turned her attention to Ethan, noticing how he sighed resignedly, covering his face with his hands. The girl asked if he really didn't like her so much that he looked so unhappy. Placing her hand on his shoulder, she said that she sat next to him in the hope of establishing communication with each other. But now she does not know what to do. Ethan replied that he would like to be friends with her, and it's not that he doesn't like her. He was not allowed to finish speaking by the teacher, who asked Alicia to introduce herself to the class and tell about herself. The girl inhaled, saying that she had already sat down. A moment later, she stood up and said that she would introduce herself from here. Glenn turned around, saying that she needed to stand in front of the whole class, because these were commonplace rules of decency. Alicia replied that she could be heard well from here, and then she smiled sweetly, saying that she was very pleased to meet everyone. Other students couldn't help but notice her for her overly impudent behavior. When she said that her rank was corporal and her manifested ability was White Jade Goblin, everyone was very surprised. Alicia finished her story by saying that she hopes for productive studies together. Mr. Reed and many of the students did not take their surprised glances off the girl until the very end. Ethan also looked at the girl. He didn't expect someone like her to be interested in him. He knew that White Jade Goblin was the only inheritable ability. Usually abilities are not inherited because the engraving of the soul, the essence of which is manifested in abilities, cannot be the same. One day, people appeared who believed that they could pass on their ability to others. In this way, they wanted to make it stronger, more accurate, and more dangerous, like a sharp blade. One of the families succeeded in this after some time. It was the Kim family, whose members were descendants of the king of the Shan dynasty. They had to leave their families and devote themselves to education and battles. To protect their bloodline, they adhered to internal marriages. All children born into this family had pale, marble-like skin. Thus, this family managed to acquire an inherited ability that allows them to summon a White Jade Goblin. But over time, it turned out that only the daughters of this family could summon the goblin. After several centuries, the family's numbers declined greatly, and the clan was on the verge of extinction. In the last generation, a child was born who could summon a sword-wielding goblin. The girl adopted all the abilities and hidden skills of her family. Currently, Alicia was the only one who possessed the highest level of swordsmanship. She was special from birth and was a true genius. Having finished telling her story, the girl asked if she could sit down. Mr. Reed, who had not completely recovered from the shock, replied that she could sit in her seat, after which he announced that from today, Alicia is the deputy leader of the 3rd Detachment. Dissatisfied, Glenn jumped up from his seat, asking how some new girl could immediately become his deputy. Slapping the teacher's desk, the teacher said that objections would not be accepted. Glenn understood that his place as leader was under threat, and he did not like it very much. Meanwhile, Ethan said that Alicia turns out to be quite famous. The girl, in turn, replied that she was just pretty, that's all. Looking into his eyes, she said that not only she was special here, but he was too, because it was not often that you met someone with an F rank. Ethan had never heard anyone of his rank being called special before. Sighing, he asked Alicia to stop looking for something in him that was not there. Laughing, the girl replied that she would definitely reveal all his secrets. Glenn couldn't think about anything other than the emerging threat in the person of the new student. He was determined to show this impudent girl his place at all costs. After the lesson ended, a big break began, during which everyone rushed to the dining room. Some have discussed how Alicia would be much better as the leader of the 3rd Division than Glenn, who is inferior to her in many ways. Sean remembered that on the day of the battles between the squads, Glenn gave strange orders, hiding behind other people's backs all the time. Walking past Glenn, Sean's interlocutor admitted that at first she thought of Alicia as a simple, arrogant girl, but after watching videos of her fights, she realized that she was great at giving orders. Elena still can't forget how cool Alicia was in that battle in the video. The girl had no doubt that Alicia would soon remove Glenn from his position. Listening to all this, the anger inside their current leader began to boil more and more. He realized that if he did not immediately do anything about the new girl, she would immediately take his place. Alicia herself was in the classroom with Ethan. Rising from her seat, she invited him to have lunch together. Our hero refused her offer, saying that he still had cleaning to do. Grabbing him by the vest, the girl said that she had no one to be with, to which Ethan objected that she was currently the most popular student in school. After letting him go, Alicia replied that she hated those who communicate with her only because of her merits. Ethan apologized to the front, saying that he would not be able to join her at lunch because he was really very busy. When he listed to her everything that he had to do for the period, Alicia said that this was too much for one person, and even the leader of the squad could not do it all alone. Ethan looked away and agreed that it was really difficult to do this alone. Leaning closer to him, Alicia asked if he ran errands for the other leaders for an hour. Her look became wild when she suggested that Ethan could carry out the assignments assigned to him by the whole class. Moving away from the girl, the hero replied that he helps everyone else from time to time. It seemed to him that if you start dividing responsibilities, complete confusion will begin, and asked that Alicia not misunderstand this situation. The girl listened to her friend in surprise. When he finished his explanation, Alicia pursed her lips in irritation. The next moment, she again grabbed Ethan by the vest and dragged him along with her. When he asked where they were going, the girl replied that she needed to deal with those who were irresponsible about their responsibilities, shifting them to others. Walking into the cafeteria where all her classmates were, Alicia easily found Michael and approached him. He looked at her in surprise, asking what she needed. The girl asked if he was not appointed responsible for cleaning the office. If this is so, then why does he shift his responsibilities onto the shoulders of someone else? Spreading his arms to the sides, Michael replied that this should be a given, since Ethan was only an F rank who could only be entrusted with this kind of task. With her hand over his mouth, Alicia told him she wasn't interested in his pathetic excuses. Smiling, she said that everyone must mind their own business. Alicia considered bullying the weak to be a very low act. She said that she would not stoop to something like that, and hoped that Michael understood perfectly what she was driving at. After her words, the guy turned very pale. When the girl removed her hand, he apologized, saying that he would not behave like that again. Pointing to Ethan, Alicia said that Michael should apologize to him, not her. Having received the apology due to our hero, they then went to the teacher. Alicia told him about the current situation. The man said that he was not aware of what was happening with Ethan and appointed the girl responsible for the distribution of responsibilities. The girl was happy with the powers given to her and thanked Mr. Reed. Ethan himself did not share her joy because she literally turned his entire habitual way of life upside down. Meeting Sean in the hallway talking to Nicholas, Alicia said that she was now dividing up the duties and handed one of them a mop, putting him in charge of the floors and the other in charge of cleaning the boards. The guys looked at the girl in bewilderment, asking why they should do frills. When Sean said that F rank should handle this, Alicia silenced him by hitting both of them in the throat with a mop. She said that shifting responsibilities to one person does not add honor to them. At that moment, a disgruntled Glenn called out to her. Alicia turned her attention to him, asking if he wanted to help with cleaning. The guy ignored her question, saying that she should call him leader. The girl nodded, then asked what he needed. He asked in bewilderment whether a leader really needs to approach his subordinate only on business. The girl didn't answer anything, silently looking at Glenn. Then she shrugged, saying that it would be better if she became the leader of the squad instead of him. The guy was infuriated by her words. Turning around, she said that since the leader of the squad did not need anything, she would go. Glenn stopped her, telling her to come to the school roof after school because they needed to discuss something about the squad. Ethan heard Alicia being called to the roof. To hear her answer, he got up from his seat and sat by the door so as not to be noticed. When the lessons were over, the girl went to the roof. Our hero followed her, keeping his distance so as not to be noticed. Rising to the very top, the girl opened the door and walked out through it without the slightest hesitation. Ethan was in no hurry to climb higher, expecting that Alicia might change her mind and come back. He waited a minute, making sure that no one was going to come down from the roof. Only then did he rise higher, thinking that Glenn had made a big mistake by challenging someone like Alicia. The hero stopped near the slightly open door, carefully listening to the conversation. Alicia asked what exactly Glenn wanted to discuss with her, to which the guy replied that by coming here, she herself had to realize everything. Then he pointed to a group of his people standing behind him. Smiling, the girl said that their leader was far from a failure and was quite popular at school. Several dozen students from different classes stood in front of Alicia. Glenn said that since she is a member of his squad, he does not intend to give up in the future after today's conversation. Alicia wondered if the leader of her squad was so weak that he couldn't talk calmly without a crowd of his friends behind him. Her words made Glenn laugh. Trying to hold back the gusts of laughter, he said that it was time to teach his deputy a lesson. The surprised girl pointed to herself, asking what exactly they were going to do. Then she looked at Glenn, asking what exactly he was going to teach her. Kneading his hands, the guy answered, explaining in a more understandable language that he would make Alicia regret her behavior. The girl asked what was wrong with her behavior. Glenn replied that she must obey her leader's orders. His words made her laugh a lot. She asked why on earth she should do this. Alicia said that Glenn must either be stronger than her or smarter for her to obey him. But the guy standing in front of her did not fit any of these points, so she said that she did not recognize him as a leader. Glenn couldn't believe that Alicia actually dared to say something like that. He commanded those behind him to activate their abilities. The girl watched her opponents, assessing their strength. She replied that they had quite a few melee weapons, but they were completely ordinary, without any additional enhancements. Glenn was sure that so many opponents must have shaken Alicia's confidence. He asked if she felt insignificant when looking at his team. The girl replied that this should apply more to themselves than to her. Glenn replied that she should stop talking nonsense, because it would not be difficult for his people to deal with her in a matter of minutes. He reminded her that using powers in the school was prohibited, especially ones as strong as hers, so if she activated it, she would be severely punished. At the same moment, several fighters stepped forward. He was confident in himself, because he selected only those who could calmly use their abilities without fear of being noticed. He knew that in order to maximize her strength, Alicia needed a sword, which the girl did not have. Comparing a professional without the opportunity to use his ability and losers, but with abilities, it was obvious to him that the latter would win. Glenn said that the girl had better give up from the very beginning, because she would not be able to cope with such a crowd. If she changed her mind about him, he promised that she would be treated a little more gently. Suddenly, Alicia asked if Glenn had any thoughts when looking at Antonio, who is quite famous in this school. The guy didn't understand what she was trying to say. Alicia said that everyone knew the rank of her normal ability, and then asked if they knew the rank of her combat ability. When she took a step forward, the guys who had come forward began to back away in fear. Glenn didn't understand what they were doing, because a swordsman without his sword poses no threat against a whole crowd with abilities. Sighing, Alicia said that he should have tried so hard during the Battle of the Squads. Then she pointed to her forehead, asking if he had forgotten what they were taught. She recalled that according to statistics, one A-rank fighter can easily defeat 100 less powerful opponents, after which one horn grew from her forehead, and her hair began to turn lighter. Alicia said that the first thing a fighter must learn to get an A rank is to go alone against the crowd. After her words, everyone froze in horror, realizing that such an opponent was too tough for them. Noticing that everyone began to hesitantly retreat back, Glenn shouted that it was stupid to be afraid of an enemy who didn't even have a weapon. Then he pointed at the girl, ordering everyone to attack her together. The guy holding the bat decided to trust Glenn's words. The next moment, he attacked her first, swinging the bat at Alicia. Contrary to his expectations, the girl simply stood there, not reacting in any way to his attack. Alicia watched the bat approach her face, wondering if this guy had overestimated himself. The next moment, the bat froze a couple of centimeters from her. The guy looked at her in surprise. The girl grabbed his hand, holding the bat at a distance. Then she threw the enemy aside and he flew into his comrades who were standing nearby. As a result, all three lay unconscious, having flown into the fence. After that, she attacked a guy standing nearby. Alicia dealt with a large number of opponents in a matter of seconds, without making much effort. One of the guys she defeated tried to get up from the ground, thinking that this girl was invincible even without a sword. He admitted that against her, having an A rank, they are nothing. Sitting down next to him, Alicia said that he had given up too quickly, so he would never reach her level. Her words seemed something akin to ridicule for the guy. Raising his head, he said that, being special from birth, she could not understand ordinary people and their efforts that they put in to achieve something. Alicia listened calmly to the guy, waiting for him to finish. He was firmly convinced that a person who had the strongest ability from birth would never be able to understand how hard it is for others to do something. When the guy fell silent, the girl rose from her knees, saying that he could continue to think like that. But her original fighting abilities were D rank. It was clear from his face that he did not believe her words. Glenn shouted that she couldn't have a D rank. There wasn't a single person in the whole country who hadn't heard about her family and what gifted children were born into it. He said that for her manipulations, Alicia should have come up with something better. No one would believe that someone like her had no talent. Shrugging her shoulders, the girl agreed that having a D-rank combat ability, despite the fact that the main ability passed down from generation to generation has an A rank, is a manifestation of true mediocrity. Then she said that despite all her desire to use the sword, she would have to restrain herself so as not to receive disciplinary punishment. By this moment, many had already managed to come to their senses and rise from the floor, looking at her with fear. Alicia realized that it was pointless to prove anything to them with words, because they would never acknowledge the enormous amount of effort she put into becoming who she is now. Looking at her palm, covered with many calluses, she said that she would show them all her efforts in practice. Glenn decided to attack her first, rushing at her at the same time along with everyone else. However, not even a minute had passed before all the attackers lay powerless on the floor. Alicia turned her attention to Glenn, who stayed away. He didn't like that everything didn't go according to his plan, and the girl turned out to be much stronger than he expected. Stretching her neck, Alicia said that everything would end as soon as she dealt with him. Glenn chuckled, saying that they could only resolve the situation between them by fighting one-on-one. Then he spread his arms to the sides, telling the girl to attack him first. Alicia was alarmed by Glenn's careless self-confidence. She assumed that he had hidden something under his jacket in advance. She fulfilled his request, approaching him with lightning speed, and told him that he should relax his abdominal muscles. Then she pointed her fist towards his stomach, intending to destroy what the guy hid there. Watching Alicia, Glenn was glad that she fell into his trap so easily. He knew that the girl was deliberately avoiding blows to the face, because she would be punished if everything was found out. That is why he took a step back and ducked, intending to take this blow to the face. Alicia tried to understand the reason why her opponent was smiling in such a situation. At some point, Glenn bent even lower, exposing himself to the girl's fist. He was sure that if he pretended that he had been beaten by Alicia, he would not receive punishment. When the girl's fist was a couple of centimeters from him, suddenly someone intercepted the blow, preventing Alicia's fist from touching Glenn. Ethan was glad that he was on time, because if he had been late even for a second, something irreparable would have happened. Gurren was surprised that F-Rank decided to interfere in their fight. Ethan stood up, throwing out fragments of plastic, which took the entire blow upon himself, ignoring the questions of the surprised guy about what he forgot here. The hero stepped on Glenn's hand, silencing him, after which he apologized for such a grave mistake in relation to his leader and asked if he had suffered much. Holding his bad arm, Glenn looked at Alicia, asking if she called this non-entity here. Pointing to our hero, the girl replied that he himself followed her. The notes of dissatisfaction in her voice touched Ethan to the core. He said that this life was too cruel to him, because he was not welcome anywhere. A few moments later, Alicia's ability dissipated. Looking at the distance from where they were to the front door, she didn't understand how Ethan managed to cover this distance in such a short time. It would have taken him at least 10 seconds to make it in time. Somehow he managed to get to them before her fist touched Glenn's face. He was also able to completely absorb her blow without getting hurt. The girl clenched her fist, realizing that this guy might be stronger than she originally thought. Feeling that something was digging into her palm, she unclenched her fist and was surprised to find pieces of plastic there. Our hero pointed to the sky, saying that the sun was already setting and invited everyone to go home, forgetting about what happened here. Rising to his feet, Glenn asked who Ethan thought he was that he dared to decide for others. He said that our hero and Alicia would be in big trouble if he complained to the teacher. Making the most innocent face that Ethan was capable of, he asked in surprise what he had done. He just protected his comrade in the squad, for which, on the contrary, he was entitled to praise. Alicia agreed with him, saying that their junior did protect Glenn's face. Because of this, there would not be enough arguments to accuse them of anything. The guy laughed at her words, saying that she shouldn't be so self-confident. Pointing towards the door near which he had previously hidden the camera, Glenn said that everything that happened was recorded. The guy admitted that he was going to show this video to the teacher, proving that Alicia and Ethan, in conspiracy, not only violated the school rules, but also brutally beat other students. When the guy finished his enthusiastic speech, the hero pointed down, asking if this was the camera he was talking about. Glenn looked down in bewilderment and saw the wreckage of his camera, which would be very difficult to restore in this condition. Ethan apologized to the leader, saying that he didn't know it was a camera and he mistook it for a regular decorative item. Awkwardly scratching the back of his head, the hero said that this was the first thing that came to his hand, that he could find here to soften the blow. Kicking one of the fragments of the camera, Olivia said that Glenn's plans were not destined to come true, but there is something that worries her more at the moment. Grabbing Ethan by the vest, she asked how he managed to stop her blow. Raising his hands in a gesture of surrender, the hero asked why she was treating him like that, since he had just helped her. The students who came to their senses watched in surprise what was happening. One of them said that A-rank fighters have not only good skills, but good luck. Alicia heard these words spoken and froze for a couple of seconds. Then she headed towards them, dragging Ethan along with her. The guys watched the girl, wondering what she was going to do. She suddenly told them to stop whining about their low rank and advised them to learn a lot from Ethan. Alicia said that they should seriously think about her words and what happened today, and then turned towards the door. Everyone just watched in surprise at the retreating girl, who was dragging our hero along with her. Glenn never moved from his place, even when the door slammed shut, leaving him and his defeated team on the roof. He lowered his head, clenching his fists. Glenn really lost today. That same night, Ethan had a dream about events that happened many years ago. In an apartment covered in splashes of blood, screaming heart-rendingly, a woman with severed limbs tried to crawl away from a little boy with a knife, calling him a monster. Blood covered the boy's entire body, strewn with countless bruises from beatings, which gave him a terrifying appearance. Standing in front of the man's corpse, the boy said that he was no different from his uncle and aunt, who raised him this way. At this moment, Ethan woke up, jumping up sharply in bed. The next moment, the alarm clock, set for 6 in the morning, rang. But the hero did not pay attention to this annoying ringing, being overwhelmed by memories from the past that haunt him in nightmares. He exhaled heavily for a few moments, returning to reality. He had stopped having this dream since entering high school, but recent events had caused his nightmare to return. A few hours later, while walking next to Ethan, Alicia noticed that something was wrong with him today. She asked if something happened to him. Smiling, Ethan answered in his usual manner that he was just a little tired, then changed the subject, asking where they were going after all. Looking at Michael's group walking next to them, the girl replied that she did not know this, because the teacher only told the sergeants detailed information. But most likely, they would have a joint lesson with the medical class. A few minutes later, they stopped near a tall building, after which Glenn said that they were there. Other voices were immediately heard from outside. Students from another school had been waiting for them for a long time and openly mocked our hero's class because they did not show their best side by being late on such an important day. An irritated Glenn approached them, asking who they were. The girl in front ignored his question and said that they were just interested in looking at Alicia, who was rumored to be extraordinarily beautiful and talented. Glenn said irritably that Alicia held the position of deputy in his squad, and if they had something to say, then they could say it to him. After his words, the students of the other school laughed, saying that their attempts to appear military looked stupidly funny. Glenn could not listen to this any longer, so he said that he was the sergeant of the 3rd Detachment of the 10th Platoon of the High School of Special Training, and then demanded that they tell him who they were. One of the girls asked who he thought they looked like. He replied irritably that they were the dregs of society. A man suddenly appeared and put his hand on the shoulder of one of the girls, saying that they should not quarrel with other schools. Lewis apologized for his classmates' behavior, saying they were a little worried. Then he extended his hand to Glenn, saying that he was very pleased to meet you. Glenn pushed away the hand extended to him, answering that Lewis should not waste his time and explain what was happening here. The guy suggested that Glenn calm down first so that they could have a normal dialogue. Alicia came out in front and said that he really should calm down and pay close attention to what he says, because their training rating has dropped a lot lately and they need to restore it. Afterwards, the girl turned her attention to Lewis and asked for forgiveness for Glenn's behavior. Lewis replied that everything was fine and then said that he was very glad to meet her. Alicia ignored his outstretched hand in greeting, saying that their squad had come for a joint lesson with the medical class. Then she asked what students from another school were doing here. Smiling, Lewis replied that they were the very class that should work together with them today. The guy also said that they had been waiting for this day for a long time. Afterwards, the students from the 2 schools headed to the bank building, where their assignment would most likely take place. Lewis said both schools have a relationship with the bank and felt it would be a great location for their practice. Noting the absence of people on this street and the presence of a security guard at the entrance, the guy assumed that the bank was closed for today on the occasion of their arrival. When they went inside, a man greeted them, saying that they had arrived on time. Some of the students had heard that security officers would be assigned to them, so they were not very surprised by the appearance of men in uniform. She took a few steps forward and introduced herself, saying that she was really looking forward to this day. The men laughed and replied that she was brave beyond her years. Alicia asked what they would do today. After her question, Jack, who met them, laughed even more, saying that he was starting to like her and would gladly take her into his unit when she grows up. Sometime later, they were led inside the bank. Taking off her sword, Alicia thought that their fighting abilities were completely ignored and treated like little children, and she would have to try hard to prove her worth. Suddenly, she clicked on Lewis, who was standing next to her. He immediately approached her, asking what business she had with him. Alicia asked him to split his class into 4 temporary squads because they needed to appear in a good light in front of the bank. Then I looked at my classmates, who were talking with the employees at full speed. Sighing, the girl said that they were acting too carelessly and no one was taking the whole situation seriously. An employee passing by said that he and other guys would go for coffee and asked if they would drink something. When Alicia heard that the cafeteria had a coffee machine and other drinks were also available for purchase, all her seriousness disappeared. Leaving her sword behind, she ran after the man, figuring that it wouldn't hurt to relax a little. Besides, there were people from the security department here. Ethan decided not to join the others in the cafeteria, remaining in the room. He believed that everyone had relaxed too much. Lewis suddenly walked up to him. The hero did not expect such an unexpected appearance of the guy, so he could not hide his surprise, wondering what he needed. Smiling, Lewis asked if Ethan was close with Alicia. The hero assumed that Lewis wanted him to arrange a date with Alicia and assured him that he would handle it perfectly. The guy waved his hands, saying that this was not why he approached Ethan. The hero turned out his empty pockets, saying that if Lewis wants to ask him to buy something, then he does not have money with him. Lewis said that assumption was also incorrect. The next moment he said that he was interested in Ethan himself. Afterwards, he asked if he would like something to drink. Pointing behind him, Lewis said he saw a drink machine nearby. Ethan agreed to his proposal and headed in the indicated direction. He stopped for a second, thinking about whether he should warn Glenn, but deciding that everything would be fine without him and moved on. A few minutes later, he was enjoying a cool cola. Watching Ethan, Lewis said that he seemed too carefree. Hearing the question of whether Ethan was hiding his abilities from the entire school, the hero almost choked on his drink. Although he replied that this was not so, Lewis was not. I was left with a strange feeling that Ethan did not fit into the class team at all and seemed out of place. Smiling, the hero replied that being carefree is his motto in life. Lewis asked what rank his ability was. Ethan replied that he was F-ranked. Surprised, Lewis asked if he was deceiving him. The hero replied that this was indeed the case. Not fully believing Ethan's words, the guy asked if he was checking him, to which the hero replied that he had no need to do that. Ethan then took a step back and threw the empty can into the trash can, which stood a few meters away from him. Lewis was surprised when the can went straight into the trash. He looked at Ethan with enthusiasm, saying that it was cool and then asked how he did it. The hero did not understand what struck Lewis so much in this action and replied that he simply threw the can. After his words, the guy was eager to do the same. After making sure there was no drink left in the can, Lewis stood in his throwing stance and threw the can into the trash. However, he was unable to do the same as Ethan did, because his can flew over the trash can, crashing into the wall, and then fell to the floor. Lewis ran for the can, saying that it was not as simple as it seemed from the outside, to which Ethan replied that the guy just had bad reflexes. Throwing away the can, Lewis said that he was not very good in combat, so he transferred to the first aid department and then asked how Ethan, with such a weak rank, managed to stay in the combat class. The hero replied that Alicia and his innate luck help him. Ethan then approached Lewis, asking what his ability was. The next moment, the guy's right hand transformed into a blade. Looking at it, Ethan said that it was a pretty good ability with a lot of potential. Lewis transformed his hand back, saying that he often hears this, but the problem is that it has not changed at all. The hero guessed what thoughts were spinning in Lewis's head and assumed that he was interested in Ethan's rank because he was thinking about transferring to the combat class. The guy smiled awkwardly, answering that it was indeed so. Ethan had absolutely no understanding of the man standing in front of him. He said that in his opinion, providing medical care is much better, because this way he can save the people dear to him. Rubbing his neck, Lewis admitted that he hadn't thought about it that way, and maybe he really just needed to reconsider his attitude. Listening to him, Ethan bit his lip painfully, trying to suppress his emotions. A few moments later, he put on his usual smile and put his hand on Lewis's shoulder and encouraged him, telling him that he needed to be more confident and take things easier. Deep down, Ethan was terribly jealous of him and thought that it would be much better if he too could use his ability to save people rather than kill. Then the hero turned around, saying that they had stayed too long here and they should hurry back. At the same time, Mr. Reed met with the organizers of the assignment for his students near the bank building. One of the men pulled out grading forms with a list of students from the envelope, suggesting that they begin grading. The teacher looked at Pavel in surprise, saying that the main task had not even begun, to which the man replied that improvisation saves such people. He advised Reed to first evaluate his best students by imagining what grade they could get, because this is a common task for consolidating theory. The teacher liked the proposed approach and agreed. He quickly assigned grades based on the students' ranks. The only one teacher Reed gave the lowest grade to was Ethan. After he handed the documents back to Pavel, he suggested they go and have coffee. He had just recently learned about a new coffee shop nearby. Returning from the cafeteria, 2 people were placed at the entrance as security, which was very exhausting if you had to stand around for a long time. Sometime later, Sean invited the girl standing next to him to play rock, paper, scissors. The one who loses goes for drinks. Lisa agreed, and they started the game, not noticing that men dressed in military equipment were approaching the entrance of the building. At the same moment, Michael approached them with an open bag of chips, saying that someone was coming this way. A few moments later, a group of unfamiliar men stopped at the front door of the building. Hearing the students talking about the appearance of some strange people, Jake stopped with a mug of hot coffee in his hand and looked towards the entrance. The next moment, he threw away the half-drunk coffee and ran there, cursing. Approaching the students, the man shouted for them to immediately move aside. But they stood still, not understanding what was happening. Jack moved behind them with lightning speed and pushed them aside, after which he created a tunfei blocking the enemy's attack. Having difficulty holding back the onslaught of the attacker, John shouted to all the students present to run to the emergency exit. The students themselves did not understand what was happening and were dumbfounded with fear, ignoring John's order. Noticing that everyone remained standing in their places, the man asked what they were doing, because they were ordered to run away from here as quickly as possible. At the same moment, his weapon began to become covered with deep cracks, unable to withstand the strength of the enemy. A couple of moments later, everyone saw how John was cut into two by an enemy unknown to them. Throwing the blood-stained sword over his shoulder, Douglas said that he was glad to meet with his comrades from South Korea. A terrifying aura emanated from this man, and the scar on half his face made him even more dangerous. A few moments later, two more guards came running here, and one of them asked Douglas who he was and what he needed here. The man ignored the question, telling the guard that he looked pretty tough and that he might be able to at least cheer Douglas up a little. Paul's partner said that the unknown person's accent was similar to North Korean. Based on these words, Paul asked the attackers if they were spies sent from the north. Douglas replied that today they are playing the role not of spies, but of beggars. After that, he threw a large bag on the floor, saying that if they did not want to lose their heads, then they had better hurry up and fill this bag with money. Paul was at a loss. He could not fulfill this request, but he was in no hurry to part with his life. A few moments later, reinforcements arrived. Realizing that they were not going to fulfill his polite request, Douglas said that they had better fill this bag with money while he asks for it in a good way. Paul shouted at the man to stop demanding the impossible and get out of here as far as possible. Raising his huge sword, Douglas said that to this day, he wonders whether the inhabitants of the southern part suffer from hearing or vision, since they dare to challenge him every time. Alicia was behind the guards all this time. Looking at Douglas, she realized that he had a fairly high rank, and they had absolutely nothing to oppose against such a monster. Paul created a wall of steel to fence off Douglas to allow his colleagues to get closer to the enemy and protect the school children who had become unwitting hostages of the situation. Alicia realized how reckless the man's action was and ran forward, shouting that he needed to get out of there. But she was too late. At the same moment, the wall built by Paul was destroyed in one blow. Alicia watched in horror as the guard's bloody body collapsed to the floor. Matt, standing nearby, staggered back, realizing that the man who could provide them with at least some safety was killed in a split second. The girl couldn't believe that Douglas dealt with an A-rank fighter so easily. She came to the conclusion that this man's rank was no lower than A rank, if not S. Douglas looked with contempt at the corpses lying nearby, saying that all attempts to maintain order were completely pointless. He then brushed the blood off his sword. Alicia attracted the attention of the rest of the students by shouting for everyone to obey her orders. She ordered everyone to run behind the banker's counters. Sean nodded his head, starting to rise from the floor. Watching the students run to the banker's desks, Douglas, standing at the coupon machine, asked if they had decided to become bank employees if he needed to take a coupon to get the money. Once on the other side of the hall, Alicia told everyone to activate their abilities, and from now on, the sergeants were in charge of their squads. Having never received an answer to his question, Douglas continuously pressed the button to receive a coupon, saying that he would like to get some money. The sound produced by this device greatly hurt the ears of our heroes. Jumping onto one of the tables, Alicia said that everyone should get together. They need to hold out until the police or teachers come to the rescue. Moving the bag a little closer, Douglas asked the school children not to be so inhospitable to their new friend, because they should support each other. Casting a glance at the man's people, Alicia was sure that in terms of strength, they were in no way inferior to Douglas. Meanwhile, the man continued his monologue, saying that their wallets were empty, so they wanted to ask the bank for help. But they encountered an inhospitable attitude in their direction, which made him very sad. Standing opposite Alicia, he inquired about the name of such a brave girl. When she told him her name, Douglas asked why she had been silent all this time, ignoring his concerns. Alicia decided that she needed to not only try to buy as much time as possible, but also try to get useful information out of him, so she said that the man did not look like a spy. They would not rob a bank, and she assumed that they had escaped from the North Korea. Douglas was amused by the girl's words and couldn't help but smile. Without removing the smile from his face, he said that he had better introduce himself. Alicia was surprised that the criminal decided to reveal his identity on his own. The next moment, the man announced that they were members of the Plague. The girl had previously heard about this group. She remembered that the location of their base had never been revealed. Members of this terrorist group opposed all humanity. Where their feet step, even insects do not survive. The only trace that the members of the Plague left behind them were piles of dead bodies and pools of blood. Others also knew about this group, no less than Alicia, which is why fear began to take hold of each of the students. Kicking his bag, Douglas said that since everyone understood everything, they should start filling his bag with money. One of the girls offered to fulfill his request and just give him the money. At that moment, Alicia stepped forward, activating her ability. Douglas looked at the girl with some delight. Alicia, on the contrary, was completely serious and, if necessary, planned to engage in battle with him. She told her classmates that they should calm down and pull themselves together. Alicia also said that no one said that they would be left alive after Douglas took his money. Examining the appearance of the girl standing in front of him, he remembered that he had heard about this ability before, but he was able to see its bearer live for the first time in his life. From his face, Alicia realized that he already knew about her family and invited the man to fight. She decided to use the chance given to her and convince Duke to fight one-on-one. The man grinned, guessing about the girl's plans. He said that she was quite smart, but he would not fall for such a pathetic trick. Spreading her arms to the sides, Alicia asked if Douglas wouldn't swarm over one student. The man laughed, after which he admitted that he liked her bravery, after which he accepted the girl's offer, ordering his men to move back with a gesture. When he asked if Alicia was as crazy as her predecessors, the girl replied that there was too much talking, after which she asked if they would fight or just scratch their tongues. Taking a more comfortable grip on his sword, Douglas said that her provocation was very sweet and he would gladly succumb to it. Pointing his sword at Alicia, the man told her to attack. Without revealing her excitement, the girl replied that it was very self-confident of him to give her such an honor. Looking at Douglas's subordinates standing a little further away, Alicia was sure that he would not break his promise to them, so if she could stay alive, if she could immobilize the man. The girl reached for her sword, but it was not there. Looking behind her and making sure that there was no weapon, the girl felt horror because without her sword, she would not be able to resist Douglas. The next moment, she remembered that she had left him during the break. When the man attacked her, she managed to lean back, escaping the attack. The wall behind it was destroyed by one blow from Douglas's sword. Alicia managed to hide for a couple of moments behind the debris. She understood that if not for her reaction speed, then she could have been in the place of this pile of stones. Alicia decided to use the fragments of the wall as her weapon, after which she jumped onto one of the fragments that was falling near Douglas, hoping to pin him to the floor. The man noticed her and turned around, cutting the fragment into small pieces, wondering where Alicia's former courage had gone, since she decided to attack on the sly. Cursing, the girl landed opposite her opponent. The man pointed the sword at her again, asking if she was sure that she was really a goblin and not a flying squirrel. Alicia managed to safely dodge all of his subsequent attacks. The other students watching their fight were amazed that Alicia was able to resist such a strong opponent. They began to support the girl, shouting her name and that she would succeed. Ethan at this time analyzed the current situation, thinking about how best to act. Lewis, who was sitting next to her, said with delight that Alicia was simply incredible to withstand the onslaught of such a monster as Douglas. Ethan put his hand on the guy's shoulder, saying that now was not the time for this. Hearing that they had to run, Lewis asked in confusion where to run. Looking at the ceiling, the hero replied that it was best for them to run upstairs, to the restroom, to the offices. They needed to hide where they could not be quickly found. Ethan was well aware that Alicia would not last long, so he decided that it would be better to try to hide the students. A few moments later, Douglas caught the girl by changing the trajectory of the sword and struck her. This sent Alicia flying to the side, hitting the wall hard. The man began to slowly approach her, dragging his huge sword along the floor. With a smile, he said that it was time for them to stop playing cat and mouse. When Alicia coughed up blood, the mood of the students watching her changed. They were horrified because their strongest student had lost. Pointing the blade of his sword at her, Duke asked if this was all Alicia was capable of. The girl replied that if he was so interested, then he should check it out himself. After her words, the man smiled bloodthirstily. At that moment, Ethan shouted for everyone to run towards the stairs. Douglas was about to finish off Alicia, raising his sword above her head, but the cry of our hero made the man freeze in surprise. Immediately after this, Ethan grabbed Lewis by the collar of his jacket and dragged him along. Everyone else ran after him. Michael was one of the first to run in the row. He was no less gripped by fear than the others. Looking back, he shouted to those lagging behind that they should not get caught if they wanted to live on, so everyone should hurry up. At the same time, Douglas scratched the back of his head, saying that the kids were smart and got caught. The subordinates who approached asked him if there would be an order about this. The man gave up, giving the order to catch all the children. His subordinates saluted, simultaneously replying that this order would be carried out. After that, they went up the stairs and divided into groups, several people per floor. Alicia suggested that since Douglas gave the order to just catch everyone, then he was not going to kill them. The girl decided to hold out for as long as she could, again standing opposite her opponent. Smiling, Douglas said he liked her tenacity. He asked if she wanted to join him. Alicia replied that she had no reason to switch sides. Grinning, the man advised her to think carefully about his proposal, because the girls were lining up for him. Alicia asked with confusion why she should believe some robber. Douglas realized that he had completely forgotten to introduce himself. Then he said his full name, Douglas Taylor. Alicia knew this name very well. The man in front of her was not only an outstanding politician in North Korea, but also the best military commander. Douglas said he's excited about rising to the top at such a young age, so he needs a talented woman by his side. Alicia was at a loss. She could not give a single compelling reason to explain why such an influential person came here in person. Noticing that the girl began to back away, Douglas sighed, sadly saying that it was for this reason that he usually did not reveal his identity. A slight trembling began to penetrate the girl's body, trying not to betray her fear in her voice. She said that such a person must have a good fortune and a lot of money. Smiling, Alicia said that with his money, she could treat all her friends to dinner at an expensive restaurant. Her words made Douglas laugh. He found the girl standing in front of him quite interesting. Looking at her, the man thought that meeting her was worth it to come here, carrying out an order to rob a bank with students inside. Pointing to himself, Douglas said that the winner of their fight had long been a foregone conclusion, and she had better be a little more polite to him while he was being kind. At this moment, Alicia had just reached the place where she had previously left her sword. Throwing her weapon with her foot, the girl said that she almost died trying to get it. When the sword was in her hand, the girl said that in future, she should take better care of her things. Afterwards, she began to slowly remove the inter from the sheath, releasing all her strength. Smiling, Alicia said that in order for Douglas to see what she was truly capable of, she would need a sword. At the same time, the students tried to escape from their pursuers. However, the military still managed to catch up and capture the terror-stricken students. They returned to the first floor, dragging the found children behind them. At the same time, Ethan and Lewis managed to successfully hide in one of the restroom stalls. He looked around and said with surprise that the banks were pretty good at keeping clean. Lewis asked excitedly if they should go even higher, since they were only on the 5th floor, while the others had gone higher. Sitting down on the toilet, Ethan replied that he needed some time to catch his breath. Looking at the hero, Lewis asked if he was okay. Ethan looked at him in surprise, replying that he was fine. Lewis remembered what happened to the guards on the 1st floor and was sure that if they were caught, they would suffer the same fate. He looked away, deciding not to voice his concerns, and simply said that it was better for them not to stay here for long, because they would be caught quickly. So Lewis took Ethan's hand, helping him up. Our hero thought that Alicia would be able to hold out for some more time. His assumptions about what would happen when Douglas finally had enough of playing were not rosy. Ethan pushed the guy's hand away, saying there was no point in running. He said that they needed to fight, which caused confusion in Lewis. The guy tried to reason with the hero, saying that it was better for them not to catch the eye of the military, because even the teachers could not oppose anything to these people, not to mention themselves, who have C and F ranks. Suddenly, Ethan asked Lewis if it was possible to divide souls by rank. Faced with a face full of incomprehension, the hero said that he once heard an entertaining story. He said that previously Alicia's fighting ability was only D rank, but now she has risen to A rank. Ethan explained that you shouldn't focus on just ranks, which can be improved through hard training. At the same time, one of Douglas's subordinates went up to the 5th floor, finding no one on the lower floors. Lewis asked why Ethan brought up the topic so suddenly. Hearing footsteps approaching, the guy panicked, saying that they had already been discovered. The man intended to check every room on the floor, but due to the noise coming from the toilet, most likely he would limit himself to only this room. Lewis said now is not the time to talk because they might be overheard. Ethan put his hand on his shoulder, asking him to listen to him. Approaching, the hero said that now Lewis should trust him and do what he says. The next moment, the man came inside, telling the students to leave because their conversations could be clearly heard even from the corridor. But his words were ignored and no one was going to go out. Then the man said that his boss didn't like slow people and they had better hurry up if they didn't want to anger him. After his words, Ethan looked out from behind the opened booth, saying that the man had a very interesting accent and asked to teach him to speak the same way. Thomas told the guy to stop being a fool. Douglas wouldn't mind if Ethan had one of his arms or legs broken. Standing opposite the man, the hero noted that without the presence of his boss, the man seemed much more talkative. The next moment, he created a dagger. Then he pointed it at Thomas, standing opposite him. Grinning, the man asked if his ability was really so insignificant. The next moment, using acceleration, Thomas ran towards Ethan, saying that he had better give up. The hero turned to Lewis, saying that he must escape at the first opportunity. Approaching Ethan, Thomas said that they had nowhere to run because they were both trapped. After his words, the hero stopped holding back, releasing all his power. Like last time, all of Ethan's characteristics became 3 times higher. Before this, Thomas, who was moving at high speed, became much slower, which allowed the hero to calculate the trajectory of the enemy's strike. Dodging his fist, Ethan said that the man was too slow. Standing next to this guy, small tremors began to break through his body. Thomas did not understand what was happening. The next moment, Ethan struck his opponent so quickly that he did not have time to react. During this, he laughed like crazy, saying that he was very sorry. Thomas grabbed Ethan's hand and said that the guy was just crazy. The hero just smiled, looking appraisingly at the man, after which he said that it is quite convenient to be able to accelerate up to 100 meters per second. Thomas asked in bewilderment if Ethan could really see other people's abilities. The guy replied that everything could happen, after which, with a look full of madness, he asked if he should cut off the man's ankles. He wondered what would happen to a person if the means of manifestation of his soul essence was destroyed, and then struck the man in the shoulder. The more blood was on him, the more madness took over Ethan. The toy in his hands was too interesting, and he wanted to play with it fully, experimenting with what would happen if he hit this or that point on Thomas's body. Lewis, who was still in the booth, watched in horror what was happening, not believing his eyes. A massive tremor ran through his body, and he unconsciously began to step back, whispering Ethan's name. Hearing his name, the hero was distracted from his toy. Lewis froze as the hero looked at him with a look of madness. Ethan asked if Lewis called him. Noticing the horror reflected on the guy's face, the hero asked what exactly he was so scared of. Overcoming himself, Lewis left the booth, his voice trembling, saying that Ethan needed to run away as quickly as possible. The hero was amused by his words. He replied that Lewis was mistaken here and asked who, in his opinion, it was really time to leave here. He slowly stood up, holding Thomas's limp body. Ethan kept his eyes on Lewis the whole time, waiting for his answer. The guy could not utter a word from the fear that shackled him. For several long moments, Ethan looked at Lewis standing opposite him. Suddenly, the madness receded and consciousness returned to our hero. At the same moment, a severe headache struck him. Ethan shook his head from side to side, trying to suppress his crazy side, causing his glasses to fly off to the floor. The next moment, the guy again grabbed the still conscious Thomas by the collar of his jacket. With all his might, Ethan shouted for Lewis to run away from here as quickly as possible. The guy flinched when the hero said that the essence of his ability, turning his hands into a blade, meant that Lewis's body could not be destroyed. Ethan advised him to think about it. Swallowing, Lewis complied with Ethan's request and ran towards the exit. After this, the hero exhaled with relief, saying that now he does not need to worry about witnesses. Thomas laughed and twirled his finger at his temple, saying that the guy had definitely gone crazy. Looking up at the man again with eyes full of madness, Ethan said that he would still have to carry out plan number 13. The man did not understand at all what this guy was talking about and thought that he definitely needed to report to his boss about this psycho. However, his plans were not destined to come true because the next moment Ethan cut his throat. At the same time, Alicia felt much more confident when she finally had a sword in her hands. Douglas studied the girl's weapon with interest, saying that this sword matches her pretty face. Placing the sword in front of her, Alicia replied that he would change his mind after the first blow. Getting into a fighting position, Douglas asked if she was really so sure that she could defeat him. The next moment, he attacked the girl. Alicia blocked his blow with her sword. Douglas looked at her with eyes full of surprise. Smiling, the girl answered his question that her victory was already obvious. Alicia aroused more and more interest in him. Returning to the original stance, Douglas asked if she really did not recognize his abilities. Looking at her sword, he had a hunch that it was somehow weakening his ability. Douglas said that Alicia has a strange sword. The girl replied that many people told her that she robbed her family by taking this sword. She said that it was created specifically for fighting strong opponents. Thanks to the constellations printed on the blade, the sword has the power of stars, thanks to which the owner, having a high level of sword skills, can destroy an opponent of A rank and higher. Having finished her story, the girl attacked the man. The next moment, her doubles appeared on either side of Douglas. He laughed, saying that Alicia was quite an interesting opponent and asked again if she wanted to join him. The girl replied that her opinion had not changed at all since last time. Raising his sword above his head, Douglas said that it would be a shame to kill Alicia now, when he had not yet fully enjoyed their battle. Then he attacked the girl along with her doubles. Alicia managed to cover herself with her sword, flying to the side. But her doubles, having hit Douglas's attack, began to disappear. The man did not give Alicia time to rest, and immediately made another attack in her direction. The girl blocked his attack with her sword, but Douglas's pressure was too strong. The next moment, the man applied even more force, forcing the girl to fly to the side, after which he said that he was superior to her in strength. Grabbing her sword tighter, Alicia said that he had too much ego and ran towards Douglas. Approaching him, Alicia again created two doubles. They all attacked the man at once, who didn't even move when she used the technique again. Douglas struck fast and hard, getting rid of Alicia's doubles. The girl hoped that her doubles would be able to distract the man's attention, giving her a chance to attack when Douglas was open. But this plan failed. Her doubles disappeared too quickly, and Alicia found herself again alone with her opponent. Jumping back, Douglas said that he was starting to like her more and more. Alicia was no longer so confident in herself. Her opponent turned out to be stronger than she had expected. Douglas asked the girl if she still thinks that she is stronger than him. Without waiting for her answer, he said that what was shown should have been enough to convince Alicia to join him. Taking a stance, the girl replied that this was not enough for her. At the same moment, the military entered through the main entrance, dragging the escaped students with them. Alicia was surprised that during this time they had already managed to catch someone. Noticing that they appeared from the street, the girl assumed that all the police had come here because of such noise, but they could not do anything because of the hostages. Douglas asked why his subordinates only brought children from the street if they had previously gone to the upper floors. One of the men reported that they were divided into two teams, one of which carried out a raid on the upper floors, and the other waited outside the building to catch students jumping from the windows. He also reported that those who had not yet returned went up to the upper floors to look for those remaining. Alicia was very surprised when she heard that the men immediately went outside, and during all this time, the police did not make a single attempt to save the hostages. The current situation seemed too strange to her. Looking at Alicia, Douglas said that all her thoughts were written on her face. Throwing the sword over his shoulder, he said that all her assumptions about why the police had not arrived yet would be incorrect, because they had temporarily closed this bank using their abilities. When Douglas said this, it was as if she had been doused with a bucket of cold water. Meanwhile, the man continued, explaining that he would not carry out an attack without proper preparation, although the outside of the bank looks the same as usual, but no one will guess what is really happening inside. Alicia found it difficult to believe that there was not a single person from outside who could help them. Previously, she thought that it would be enough to just hold out until the police arrived. But now the situation has changed greatly. Even if she manages to escape to bring help here, by the time she returns, everyone else will have been killed. The girl clenched her sword. She realized that it was now useless to stall for time further by fighting, but Alicia didn't know what else she could do in this situation. Looking at her, Douglas asked where her former warrior spirit had gone. One of the bank employees, who was captured along with his students, kept looking warily at the leader. Suddenly, he stood up and used his ability to run forward. He managed to get to the nearest table with the phone in a matter of seconds. Picking up the phone, Matt pressed the emergency call button. Then he asked for security, saying that their bank had been captured by terrorists. Saying this, the man turned around, looking at the invaders, who for some reason unknown to him did not try to stop him. There was no response from the receiver to his messages. Matt excitedly asked if anyone could hear him. Silence again became his answer. Then the man realized that for some reason, the connection was blocked. At that moment, Douglas approached and threw the bag on the table in front of Matt. Smirking, he asked if Matt had not heard his conversation with a young lady a few minutes ago. The man fell to his knees in fear of Douglas, who in turn explained that among his subordinates, there was one who specialized in isolation, which meant that neither the phones nor the emergency call button worked. After his words, Michael and Sean took out their phones and saw that there really was no connection. Matt asked why someone as important as Douglas would break into a bank in broad daylight. Tilting his head to the side, he replied that a man should not belittle his position because all professions are equally important. Not paying attention to his words, Matt shouted that if the special forces found out about his whereabouts here, then Douglas would be in trouble. Smiling, Douglas replied that the fact of the matter was that no one would be able to find out anything because of the isolation, which he had already talked about twice. After this, the man's gaze became more bloodthirsty, and a terrifying aura began to emanate from him. Matt froze in horror, realizing that he was about to be killed. The next moment, the sharp blade of Douglas's sword was pointed at him. The man said it was time for Matt to learn an important lesson. after which Douglas raised his sword over his head. At that moment, Alicia shouted at him to stop, calling him a monster. The man froze in surprise at her words. Turning to her, he asked if he really heard it wrong, and she really just called him a monster. Alicia suggested that they fight again to determine the true winner. She sincerely hoped that Douglas would agree and leave the man alone. However, contrary to her expectations, he replied that the girl had already suggested this to him earlier, after which he asked if she understood the meaning of the words she had said earlier. Raising his sword above his head, Douglas said she didn't have to answer. The next moment, he cut off Matt's leg, causing him to start screaming in severe pain. Alicia took a step back, watching such a terrifying scene. Ignoring Matt's pleas for mercy, Douglas raised his hand for another blow and said that if she knew what her words meant, she would never have called him that. The next moment, Matt's screams stopped, and the floor and walls were stained with the man's blood. Alicia closed her eyes at the last moment, not wanting to witness such cruelty. A few moments later, Matt's severed head flew near the girl. She opened her eyes when she heard something fall and, holding back a scream, took a few steps back. Douglas pointed the sword at her, saying that since she decided to challenge him a second time, he would not be as courteous to her as before, but would simply cut off her legs and arms, after which he would carry them with him in a bag. He said that he would do Alicia great honor by giving her death by his hand. Suddenly, the door leading to the stairs opened, making a loud sound. Everyone in the room turned their gaze in that direction. The next moment, Lewis came out with his hands up. Douglas turned to him and asked who he was. One of the subordinates came forward saying that he would immediately grab the stranger, but Douglas stopped him. Lewis felt very uncomfortable being under so many eyes studying him. He thought that Ethan had been wrong in his assumptions, saying that it would be hell when he warned him about the situation on the first floor. Looking at the students trembling in fear and the pools of blood on the floor, Lewis was sure that this situation was much worse than just hell. In the bathroom stall before Thomas walked in, Ethan told Lewis to run to the first floor as soon as he activated his ability and tell everyone that he was here. The guy asked in bewilderment how he could leave Ethan alone in such a dangerous situation. Smiling, the hero asked Lewis to just trust him. Now he was on the first floor, and all he had to do was reveal Ethan's location in order to fulfill his request. When Douglas asked the guy to introduce himself, he gave his name and said that he was a 10th grader from medical school, after which he said that all the money was on the 5th floor. Grinning, Douglas asked if the safe was really located in such a strange place. Lewis explained that his friend had moved everything there earlier. The man was alarmed by the guy's words about this strange friend. Without turning around, he asked his subordinates why those who went upstairs to look for students had not yet returned. Looking at the fighters standing behind him, Douglas asked menacingly why they were standing here doing nothing while a child was walking around the floors of the building. One of the subordinates sat down on one knee in front of his commander, bowing his head. He said that he would check everything himself and bring the child here. As Douglas approached him, lowering his sword near his leg, Joshua began to beg the man for a chance to correct his mistake. Douglas laid his hand on the trembling subordinate and said that he was lucky that his hands were already stained today, after which he ordered the last student to be brought here, taking the money with him. Joshua immediately stood up and saluted, thanking his commander for the service rendered to him. Turning around, Douglas looked at the rest of his subordinates, saying that they too would go along with Joshua and warned that he would not be so merciful if another mistake was made. Then he turned his gaze to Lewis. The guy flinched when faced with Douglas's gaze, which did not bode well. The man asked if he was going to go up with the others or if he should do it himself. Sighing, Lewis replied that he would go up to the 5th floor, accompanied by Douglas's men. Having received his answer, the man smiled, praising the guy for making the right choice, after which he approached the students sitting on the floor, saying that while his subordinates were busy with his friend, he would also have a little fun here. The next moment, Douglas pointed at Alicia and asked if everyone could see her clearly. Without waiting for an answer, he said that he would leave alive the one who brought him her leg or arm. Douglas was interested to know what they would do next. After the man's words, the faces of Alicia's classmates became whiter than a sheet. Clenching her fists and lowering her head, Erica asked if they should really go against Alicia. Douglas smiled as he watched the seeds of doubt begin to form in the students' minds. Catherine, sitting nearby, asked how soon could Erica dare to think about something like that when Alicia had been fighting for them from the very beginning, risking her life. Erica looked at Douglas and replied that now the situation has changed and everyone has known the winner for a long time, and besides, it will depend on him who will be left alive. Suddenly, Douglas asked if anyone had a watch, saying he would start the timer because he was tired of waiting. After his words, the two guys said that they simply had no choice, and Alicia had a wealthy family that could provide her with a good life, even without a pair of limbs. The girl herself was very unpleasant to listen to such words, but she perfectly understood that their lives were at stake. Lewis suddenly walked up to her. Alicia asked indifferently what he needed. The guy whispered that she shouldn't worry, she just needed to hold out a little longer. The girl looked at him in surprise, asking what this meant. But Lewis only smiled back at her. Alicia said that he should have stayed in his hiding place further, because now the opponents had one more hostage. The guy replied that he had come to help. Hearing his words, everyone else looked at Lewis as if he was crazy. One of the men, a former bank employee, scornfully asked if the guy wanted his hand in gratitude. Lewis ignored the question and turned to Alicia. He smiled and said that he and Ethan were now best friends. The next moment, Douglas destroyed one of the nearby tables, drawing attention to himself. Rubbing his neck, he said wearily that he would kill everyone here if he was kept waiting too long. The next moment, trembling with fear, everyone began to apologize to Alicia, saying that she should understand them. Without taking their eyes off the girl, they said that they simply had no other choice. Douglas turned to Lewis, asking whose side he was on. Smiling awkwardly, he replied that he would take Alicia's side. The man grinned and then said that in this case he would also need part of this guy's body as payment for saving one life. Everyone looked at each other excitedly when they heard that the number of those who could survive had increased to 10. Lewis smiled awkwardly, asking Alicia if she could protect both of them. The girl called out to Douglas, calling him a North Korean puppet. The man turned around, asking how long she would continue to address him so disrespectfully. Alicia ignored his question, asking what would happen if she simply killed all the hostages. Would he then leave her and Lewis alive? She argued that everyone should have a chance to survive. The next moment, Douglas's booming laughter was heard in the room. He said that Alicia was saying some pretty funny things. He accepted her offer, promising that he would leave them alive. Alicia clenched her sword, pointing it at the students standing opposite her. Seeing that she was serious, they cowered in fear. The girl said that she too had no other choice but to stay alive in this way. Catherine looked uncertainly from Alicia to Douglas. The man, smiling bloodthirstily, asked what everyone was waiting for. They just needed to choose, namely, a part of Alicia and Lewis's body or their own heads. Catherine turned back, saying that in such a situation it would be fair to save the majority. She tried to convince Alicia, saying that it was too selfish of her to kill them all for 2 lives. Alicia replied that she had no other choice. Then she created clones and ran towards Catherine. The girl activated her ability, creating a shock glove. As she approached, Alicia told her to fight with all her might. The next moment, she pointed the blade of the sword at Catherine. She clenched her fist, gathering all her strength. The next moment, her fist collided with Alicia's sword. As soon as the double was dispelled, the real Alicia appeared in front of the girl. Catherine pulled back, not understanding what had just happened. Pulling her towards her, Alicia delivered a powerful blow to her opponent's stomach. The next moment, she whispered in Catherine's ear so that she would listen carefully. Then she asked the girl for a favor. Catherine's eyes widened in surprise. When she finished, Alicia threw the girl towards the other hostages. Catherine showed no signs of life, lying unconscious. Everyone began to discuss the fight they had just seen. After looking at Lewis, they decided that he would be easier to defeat than Alicia. Hearing their plan, the girl sighed heavily. The next moment, she stepped forward, telling Lewis to stay behind her. Watching this, Douglas could not hold back another burst of laughter, hiding his face with his hands. Raising his head, he said that this spectacle was becoming more and more exciting. Not everyone in this room shared his opinion. They had to desperately cling to life, playing by the rules of this crazy man. Alicia stood with her sword pointed towards her opponents, ready to fend off their attack if they dared to attack her. Douglas, having recovered from his fit of laughter, shouted for them to amuse him even more by killing each other. At that moment, an empty Coca-Cola can flew past him, attracting the man's attention. He turned around with a murderous look and asked what it was. However, there was no one behind him, only an open door leading to the stairs. Ethan, who threw the can, stood a little further from the entrance, so that he would not be noticeable. He smiled bloodthirstily, glad that everything was going according to his plan. Douglas picked up the can, trying to figure out where it came from. Looking at this half-Coke can, Lewis immediately knew who exactly threw it there. The next moment, the man turned around and threw the can, so that it bounced and fell near the door. Douglas noticed the silhouette of a man at the entrance, and grinning, asked if he was Lewis's mysterious friend. Instead of answering, the guy attacked the man. Douglas dodged the weapon thrown at him, after which he irritably asked if he was suicidal for deciding to attack him in such a way. However, when the man looked down to understand what exactly he was attacked with, he froze in place. He saw that it was torn pieces from the masks of his subordinates, whom he had sent to explore the upper floors. Douglas looked in surprise again towards the door, where a young man unknown to him had stood a few seconds ago, but he disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared. He had absolutely no idea what was happening here. Grabbing his sword, Douglas thought that the boy had made a mistake by underestimating his opponent. The next moment, he slashed the air with his sword, putting all his strength into this blow. No one understood why Douglas launched powerful attacks, cutting through the air above him. A few moments later, he stopped and the ceiling suddenly began to collapse. Everyone watched in horror as the collapsed part of the ceiling fell on their heads. Alicia ran to the center of the room, where the ceiling collapsed, creating clones along the way. She made it in time and managed, together with her clones, to hold this concrete layer over the heads of the hostages, before anyone could get hurt. Douglas, without the slightest surprise in his voice, noted that the girl was very strong, after which he asked to be patient a little, because he still needed to meet someone. Alicia looked at him with hatred, not believing that he was actually going to kill them all. Having come to his senses, he looked at the girl and said that if even one person moves, everyone will die. As soon as the hostages relaxed and were glad that everyone was saved, Douglas again knocked the air out of their lungs. Turning around, the man added that now is the perfect moment to cut off Alicia's limbs. He advised them to carefully consider his words. At that moment, the girl asked if he really thought that she would just stand there and wait until she was dismembered. With a mocking grin on his face, the man replied that if everything was different, she would not be standing now with a heavy canvas on her shoulders, after which he said that he needed to leave for a while. Immediately after this, he jumped into the passage he had made in the ceiling, flying through floor after floor. Alicia and the rest of the students remained in their places, afraid to even move. Suddenly, the girl said that she wouldn't last long, and if they didn't want to die, then everyone should come out from under this broken ceiling. Lewis ran up to the girl and shouted that everyone should really get out of there. However, a woman who came forward stopped the guy, saying that if everyone came out, they risked dying at Alicia's hand in the future. Sean, who was sitting in the trap, shouted out that otherwise, if they stayed here, this block would crush them to death. Michael approached Lewis, saying that he should move away, because earlier Alicia said that she would kill them all, so now they have a great chance to do it first. Lewis asked in bewilderment if no one saw how she rushed to save people. He tried to explain to everyone that Alicia did not really intend to kill anyone, because if this were not so, she would not be standing now, holding the collapsed ceiling. He suggested joining forces and running to the exit, even if enemies were waiting for them outside. Together they could break through. Michael interrupted him by asking what would happen to them if Douglas decided to return at that moment. Catherine, who had come to her senses, intervened in their argument. The girl looked at Alicia, who was holding on with all her strength. At the same time, Ethan heard footsteps behind him and turned around, saying that his guest was a little late. After looking around, Douglas asked if there was anyone else here besides them. It was difficult for him to believe that some schoolboy had dealt with a squad of his best fighters alone. Noticing that the man was staring intently at the corpses of his people, Ethan said that he had to have fun with them for a long time. With a look full of madness, the guy said that he would have managed it faster if they had attacked him with the whole crowd at the same time. Smiling widely, the man thought that the girl he had fought with earlier had impressed him greatly, but the guy standing in front of him was able to completely outshine her. Douglas wondered where this monster came from. Ethan ignored his question and ran his index finger along the blade of his dagger with a bloodthirsty smile on his face. Douglas extended his hand to the guy, asking if he wanted to join him. He even promised Ethan a good position if he accepted his offer. After his words, the hero put his palm to his face, carefully thinking about something. A few moments later, he broke into a happy smile, saying that it would be best to take the ninth path. Immediately after that, he took off, approaching Douglas in a zigzag pattern. The man stood up when the guy was close enough. Catching the right moment, Douglas attacked Ethan, but he dodged his sword. The man made several more attempts, but the hero never fell under a single blow, jumping from side to side. Then, Douglas decided to show the guy one of his trump cards, using one of the strongest attacks in his arsenal. However, this time our hero safely escaped the attack, moving behind his opponent. Douglas did not expect that he would catch the guy with his last attack, because it was made for a completely different purpose. Seeing Ethan running towards him, the man grinned, thinking that the boy had fallen into his trap. No one knew that his ability allowed the sword to pass through surfaces. When the man activated his ability, Ethan had the opportunity to study it, quickly approaching his opponent. Once at a sufficient distance, the smiling hero said that Douglas had a rather long name for his ability. The man froze for a couple of moments, not understanding how this brat knew about his ability. This hesitation was enough for Ethan to push off from the sword and jump behind Douglas, simultaneously asking why the name was so long. The man did not move, trying to understand what had just happened. Having landed not far from him, the hero did not stop bombarding the man with questions. With his back to him, Douglas lowered the sword raised above his head. He asked Ethan if he was able to see the abilities of other people, to which he received a positive answer. When the guy asked why he had several pluses near his rank, and what the gain factor was, the man shuddered. He asked what the annoying brat's name was. The hero, with a crazy expression on his face, said his name, drawing out the syllables. After this, Douglas asked whether his ability was related to vision, and said that if he really could see the ranks and abilities of people, then Ethan would have no equal in his squad. The hero interrupted the man, saying that Douglas was the strongest person he had met recently. The man did not understand why he suddenly started talking about this, and asked once again if the guy wanted to join him. Completely ignoring Douglas's words, after staring closely at the man, Ethan said with displeasure that he only saw 9. Not understanding what the guy meant, the man asked what else he could see. The hero replied that he saw only 9 ways to kill him. The man was surprised that this guy could even do such things. Covering his face with his palm, he said that he was jealous of Ethan. Taking the dagger more comfortably, the hero said that 1 way would be enough for him to kill his opponent. Grinning, the man said that he was very sorry that their negotiations ended so quickly, after which they rushed at each other with bloodthirsty smiles. At the same time, Glenn was hiding in the control room. He deliberately disabled the elevator so that he would not be found so quickly. He reasoned that this building was located in the city center, so a simple call would be enough, and the police would immediately rush here. The guy decided to sit here longer because he could get into trouble if he left his shelter too early. Ethan raced towards Douglas with a crazy smile. He read all the man's attacks and dodged them with ease. Now Ethan disappeared right from under Douglas's nose, quite angering the man. He looked up and saw that this guy was sitting on the blade of his sword. Ethan smiled contentedly. He enjoyed pissing off his victims. Gritting his teeth, the man shouted that the hero only knows how to dodge, after which he told him to attack. Ethan complied with his request. He jumped towards Douglas, aiming a dagger at his right eye. When the sharp blade almost caught up with him, the man managed to dodge at the last second. The hero flew past the man, landing a few meters away from him. Douglas managed to avoid losing his eye, but the guy managed to wound him in the shoulder. Ethan wasn't about to give the man time to rest, so he attacked his opponent again, surprising him. The hero rushed past the man at high speed, once again inflicting a deep cut on him. Ethan was not going to stop with just 2 wounds on the man's body, continuing his high-speed attacks. Covering himself with a sword from Ethan's attacks, Douglas realized that all this time the guy was just having fun, mistaking him for a toy. During one of the next attacks, the hero asked in a bored voice if he would wait for an attack from his opponent in return. Then he stopped in front of the man, saying that he was already bored with their game and it was time to end. Smirking, Douglas said that if he continues to hide his main trump card, he will definitely die here. The next moment, the man extended his hand to Ethan, who noticed that it was shrouded in something strange. His eyes widened in surprise. He did not expect that Douglas would have such a surprise in store. He understood that if the man touched him, it would be bad, so the hero jumped back with lightning speed. Once at a safe distance, Ethan carefully examined the man standing opposite, whose hand was enveloped in strange tentacles. The guy asked in bewilderment where Douglas got 2 abilities, since a person can only have no more than 1, because everyone has only 1 soul. He tried to determine the level of this strange ability of the man, but all information about it was blocked. Ignoring his question, Douglas said that speed would no longer help Ethan. The hero asked where his opponent got such a strange hand. Smirking, he asked why he was so interested in this. Ethan suggested that Douglas had become stronger with the help of this hand, after which he smiled bloodthirstily and said that now the real fun would finally begin. Pointing at Ethan, the man told him to stop being a jerk because if he kept fighting like this, he would end up without a scratch. When the hero asked in surprise if Douglas was going to run away from him, the man smiled bloodthirstily, answering that he had not heard these words for a long time. Ethan asked how his opponent decided to escape from him. Smirking, Douglas replied that he had 1 way in stock, after which he squeezed his sword tighter, saying that he would remember such an interesting opponent. The next moment, he pointed his sword upward and, using his ability, began to cut his way out. A few moments later, the roof of the bank building was breached. When this happened, the walls of the building shook as if from an earthquake. There was a huge hole in the roof, running through most of the bank's floors. Hearing a loud sound, Glenn came out of his shelter and froze in shock when he saw the floor and ceiling pierced through. He walked closer and looked down, thinking that Alicia couldn't do something like that, so it was most likely Douglas's doing. As soon as the passage was ready, the man jumped up. Watching him, Ethan asked if Douglas wanted to play hide and seek with him. The hero happily said that he liked this idea and would also join the man. Looking over his shoulder at him, Douglas said that he should stop joking, because just anyone could rise to such a height. However, the next moment, Ethan jumped after him, flying several floors and ending up near Douglas. Looking at the approaching guy, the man thought that if he didn't quickly get away from here, he could really get hurt. At the same moment, he noticed Glenn on the top floor, looking at him in surprise. Smiling, Douglas said that luck was on his side today. The next moment he jumped onto the roof, Glenn did not immediately notice the guy chasing the man. When he recognized him as Ethan, he was surprised to ask what he was doing here. Instead of answering, the hero rushed at Glenn, completely forgetting about Douglas. He was delighted at the appearance of another new toy. At that moment, the hero's consciousness became clouded for several moments, and he simply flew near his stunned classmate. He looked behind himself in surprise, watching how Ethan, who had just been burning with the desire to kill him, was now lying on the floor. When he fell, he hit himself quite hard so he could not get up immediately. Glenn ran up to him and asked the lying guy where he came from here. Watching them, Douglas asked the blonde guy if he knew this crazy man. Turning around, Glenn asked the man what happened, because he had recently fought with Alicia. However, he was in no hurry to tell this boy anything, drawing some conclusions in his head. Having never received an answer from Douglas, Glenn tried to independently understand what happened here. When he was struck by the strange thought that Ethan had forced such a strong opponent to flee, the guy immediately brushed it aside, denying even the possibility of its existence. He turned to the hero, irritably asking what happened here. At the same moment, Ethan's madness again captured his mind. Glenn noticed that something was wrong with him and took a couple of steps back. Instinctively, he felt the danger emanating from him. Douglas also noticed that the boy with whom he fought had returned to his previous state. Calling out to Glenn, he thanked him for drawing the attention of this psycho to himself. He looked at the man with confusion, asking what he meant. Douglas again did not answer his question, only said that he always remembers those who helped him. After which he smiled and quietly said that even if the assistant himself did not realize the service provided. Glenn was completely confused, and Douglas's words confused him even more. Rising to his feet, the man advised him to run to the first floor as soon as possible, if he, of course, wanted to stay alive. The guy looked at Douglas with a stunned face, not noticing the approaching steps from behind. When the man jumped in an unknown direction, Glenn shouted after him that he was not going to fall into this trap, knowing full well that Douglas's people would be waiting for him on the first floor. Smirking, the man simply wished the boy good luck. He was glad that he followed his instinct and decided to go south. Still not understanding anything, Glenn looked at Ethan, whose behavior was too strange. The next moment, Ethan stood up straight and looked at Glenn with a manic expression on his face. Approaching him, the hero asked, drawing out the syllables, what the leader of the squad was doing here. Tilting his head to the side, Ethan said that Glenn had allowed his toy to escape, so he would have to take that role. The way Ethan looked at him made Glenn recoil, beginning to understand the meaning of Douglas's words. The guy turned around and looking at the hole made in the floor, thought that if he didn't run away now, then this wouldn't end well. The next moment, he used his ability to pull out one of the stones and jumped down. He glanced over his shoulder to make sure Ethan hadn't followed him. The hero stood near the hole watching the retreating guy. Smiling even wider, he said that he was again taking the role of water in this game. The next moment, he flew after his leader, moving in a zigzag motion. A few moments later, he managed to catch up with Glenn, saying that he was already tired of this game and suggested that he play something else. Turning around, Glenn tried to hit Ethan, yelling at him to get away from him, but he easily dodged. The hero stared at the guy for a couple of seconds. He had seen over 15 ways to kill Glenn and was trying to figure out which one would be the most fun. Having chosen the most suitable one, he smiled bloodthirstily, pronouncing the name of his squad leader. The next moment, he approached the guy, grabbing him by the throat. Glenn asked Ethan to let him go, while at the same time trying to unhook his hand from his neck. Ignoring his requests, the hero said that he had come up with a new game for them called Cut Off an Arm or Cut Off a Leg. Hearing Ethan's proposal, Glenn shouted that he was a complete nutcase. Then he waved his hand, which was holding a huge stone, forcing the hero to let go, after which he told him to play his own games. Pressing himself against the destroyed ceiling, Ethan replied that he did not really like this proposal. The next moment, he pushed off from the surface and flew after the leader. The guy watched in horror as Ethan approached him at breakneck speed. Suddenly, he felt someone else's arms grab him. Still with the same smile, Ethan said that it was quite difficult to keep up with the leader. But now he was not going anywhere. Glenn tried to unhook this psycho from himself, but all his attempts were unsuccessful. Not knowing what else he could do, the guy said that if Ethan didn't let him go, they would both fall to death. Pressing himself even closer to Glenn, the hero said that he would not die. Suddenly, the leader of our hero's squad heard a familiar voice calling out to him from below. Gritting his teeth, Glenn thought that preserving his pride was not the most important thing now when his life was at stake. The next moment, he clenched his fist, concentrating all his strength. Then he pointed his fist at Ethan's face, saying that he did not intend to die at his hands. Ethan dodged his blow, saying that Glenn was too slow. The next moment, he noticed a sword flying at him. When the blade was a few centimeters from his face, he smiled, saying that someone else wanted to play with them. The next moment, he threw the sword aside. Glenn looked at the guy in bewilderment, trying to understand how he managed it. A couple of seconds later, he looked ahead, shouting for the girl standing there to move aside. After waiting a little time, he threw the stone he was holding down. Glenn himself flew several metros to the side. Ethan landed after him. Rising to his feet, he looked in the direction where his next toy should have been. However, instead of a person, he found in this place the sword with which he had been attacked earlier. Grinning, he said that today all his toys like to play hide and seek. At the same time, Alicia was still standing, holding the collapsed ceiling. Although she tried to pretend that everything was in order, but from the girl's trembling hands, one could understand that she was at the limit. Alicia tried to come up with some way out, but all her ideas led to a tragic end for either her or those she was now protecting. At the same moment, Catherine stepped forward, activating her ability. Without taking her eyes off Alicia, the girl created a strike glove. Those behind her called out to her, saying that they should do it first. Lewis desperately tried to stop Catherine and the others from making a mistake. However, none of his words and prayers helped. They began to threaten him, saying that if he did not leave, he would suffer himself. Despite this, the guy stood his ground, asking if they were tormented by their conscience for their intentions towards Alicia, who had been fighting for them all this time. The bank employee replied that Lewis was still too young and did not understand much. She was obliged to survive by any means for the sake of her family and children. Alicia could no longer hold on, experiencing severe pain throughout her body. The students sitting under the collapsed ceiling began to scream in fear as the ceiling began to fall. Catherine said that Alicia is at the end of her strength. She demanded that Lewis immediately step aside, ceasing to protect the girl who was struggling to hold the ceiling. The guy also activated his ability, saying that if Catherine gets one step closer to them, he will have to attack. Sighing and clenching her fist, the girl replied that in this case, she had no choice. The next moment, she turned around, ordering her squad to start rescuing people from the ceiling and stand up for their comrade. Everyone looked at Catherine in bewilderment. Moments later, the members of the first squad stepped forward, following their leader's orders. They stood behind Catherine, blocking Alicia and Lewis. Alicia told Catherine to stop showing off in front of everyone and rushed to help her deal with the problem on her shoulders. Michael and the bank employee couldn't believe that anyone else would take Alicia's side. The woman stepped forward, saying that the best thing to do would be to sacrifice 2 people and get out of here alive. But she was stopped by Catherine. The girl said that if anyone else came close, she would have to use force. The bank employee raised her hands in a gesture of surrender and took several steps back. A few moments later, Anna said that all the students had been removed from the ceiling and that Alicia now needed to be carefully freed. Immediately after this, Lewis and Catherine destroyed the ceiling, relieving the girl of her heavy burden. Kneading her joints, Alicia said with relief that she had finally gotten out. Lewis approached her and asked the girl to explain everything to him. Alicia touched Catherine's shoulder, replying that she simply trusted her comrades. After her words, Lewis looked at Catherine in confusion. The girl said that in the moment before Alicia hit her, she reminded them of what they were taught at school and asked them to pretend to be scared. Immediately after that, Alicia pushed her back. As she took a sitting position, the girl thought that she had actually forgotten what they were taught due to extreme fear. They were told that members of the plague never leave witnesses of their atrocities alive. Remembering this, she realized that even if they killed Alicia or Lewis, Douglas still would not leave everyone else alive. Catherine approached her squad, saying that she had something to tell them. Having outlined the situation, the girl said that in the future, whatever she ordered, they must carry it out without question. When Catherine finished her explanation, Alicia said disgruntledly that she had asked her to just pretend that she was scared and not to start showing off. Suddenly, they heard a loud sound and then felt the building shake. Looking up, Alicia asked in bewilderment who Douglas was fighting there. At the same moment, Lewis, having come to his senses, shouted out Ethan's name, which is why the girl looked at him with incomprehension. Trying to explain to her what was happening, the guy asked if she remembered the reason why Douglas went upstairs. The girl replied that someone lured him there. Grabbing Alicia by the shoulders, he said that it was Ethan. When he said this, the girl looked at him as if he were crazy. Pushing the guy away from her, she said that Lewis shouldn't joke like that. Even though Ethan has good endurance and reaction speed, he is still F rank. Lewis asked with a serious face who else besides Ethan. It could be if everyone else except him and Glenn were here. But the leader of the third squad would not be able to fight back against Douglas. He then pointed towards the hole in the ceiling, saying that they should hurry up. Looking at the girl's shocked face and the lack of any reaction to his words that they needed to rush to Ethan's aid, Lewis turned around and ran towards the stairs alone. Alicia looked at the guys retreating back, not believing that Ethan had actually entered into a fight with Douglas, but judging by Lewis's face, he definitely wasn't joking. Although she understood everything with her mind, It went against the usual image of Ethan. The girl got angry when she thought that the guy might die at the hands of an enemy that even she could not cope with, and involuntarily activated her ability. The next moment she approached the surprised Catherine. Alicia asked the girl for one favor. A couple of minutes later, she and Lewis were hurrying up to the 5th floor. They stopped in front of a large door, behind which the battle between Ethan and Douglas should take place. Alicia walked up to the door and looked at the guy and said that she was going to open it. The next moment, the door began to slowly open. Upon entering, they froze in horror. Seeing a huge pool of blood in which were the dead bodies of Douglas's subordinates, Lewis covered his mouth with his hand, holding back the urge to vomit. Looking around, Alicia found it difficult to believe that Ethan had really done all this. She also noticed marks on the walls left by Douglas's sword. From their number, the girl realized that the two had been fighting for quite some time. The next moment, she looked up in surprise, thinking that the hole on the 1st floor was not even close to this huge tunnel. Without lowering her head, Alicia realized that in the battle with her, he was holding back. But for some reason, he decided to fight with all his might against Ethan. This seemed very strange to the girl. Lewis, who approached her, also looked up in surprise, not understanding where this huge hole came from. The next moment, Alicia noticed 2 people flying down. Taking a stance, she grabbed her sword and tried to see who exactly was there. A few moments later, she managed to recognize Glenn in one of the flying ones. But the girl could not see the face of the one who was chasing him because he was too far away. Her eyes widened in surprise when a couple of seconds later, she saw Ethan there, but he looked very different from his usual self. Lewis, standing next to him, asked in confusion what was going on. It seemed to Alicia that Glenn was in danger and took her sword out of its sheath. The next moment, she threw it, aiming at Ethan, turning it around so as not to seriously injure the guy. After that, she grabbed Lewis's hand and ran with him to the side, away from the hole in the ceiling. A few seconds later, a huge stone fell to the floor, raising a column of dust. Rising to his feet, Glenn looked in horror in the direction where Ethan was supposed to land. At that moment, Alicia ran towards him. The girl asked the guy what happened here. Before Glenn could say a word, Ethan's voice came from behind Alicia and Lewis, causing them to turn around. The hero approached them with a smile on his face. Seeing that all his comrades were assembled, he stopped, and with a satisfied face invited them all to play. This was the first time Alicia had seen Ethan in this state. Looking at his friend, Lewis said hesitantly that he probably shouldn't have come up here. The hero stood still with a bloodthirsty smile, waiting for their answer. Taking the silence of his comrades as agreement, he began to slowly approach them. When Alicia asked if he really was Ethan, the guy looked up at her, saying that she had a rather interesting ability, but it was useless. The girl asked in bewilderment what this meant. In response to her question, Ethan repeated that her ability was too useless, which angered the girl. Glenn, standing next to her, said that this was no longer the F-rank loser they knew before. The guy had already opened the door, about to leave here, when the girl turned around, asking what he meant. Glenn explained that Ethan was chasing Douglas around the entire building. In return for Alicia's help earlier, he advised her to run away from here as far as possible, while Ethan was busy chatting. Remembering what this guy had become after he finished speaking, Glenn said that if they wanted to survive, they had to escape. Immediately after that, he ran down the stairs, ignoring Alicia's request to explain everything properly. When Lewis said that Ethan had become even crazier than before, the girl asked in surprise if he had seen the hero in such a state before. The guy replied that that time he was more sane and it was possible to talk to him. Ethan did not pay attention to their conversation, looking at the girl with interest. He thought carefully about the best way to kill her, trying to see new ways. A few moments later, his insane laughter rang out. Covering his mouth with his hand, Ethan said that he could not stand it any longer. Smirking sarcastically, Alicia said that with such patience he would not get far. The girl said that it was not so easy for her to please, and then asked if he could claim something with such behavior. With the same maniacal smile, Ethan ran his finger over his dagger, asking why he didn't just kill all the candidates and the girl herself along with them. Sighing heavily, she told Lewis that she would try to buy some time, and he should run away from here. After that, Alicia ran forward, leaving the surprised guy behind. Assessing her strength, she assumed that she would last about 30 seconds. The hero also jumped up and ran to meet her. Alicia dodged Ethan's blow, noting that his actions were very fast and precise. During their battle, she did not notice how she received several cuts. Suddenly, the girl stopped, realizing that he had a rather strong ability, but it was difficult to control. In this, their abilities were similar. But for Ethan, everything was much more complicated than for her. When the guy asked why she stopped, Alicia smiled gently and said that it had been very difficult for him all this time, but he did a great job. Ethan froze at her words, even if only for a moment, but his gaze changed. from which Alicia read that deep down he had been missing such words of encouragement all this time. The next moment the guy smiled, saying that she also did a good job, after which he said goodbye to her and dealt her the final blow. The next moment Alicia fell to the floor. Looking at her motionless body, Ethan smiled even wider. When our hero was in his first year of primary school, he lost both his parents. He remembered the day when he and his uncle came to the morgue. The official version of their death was an attack by a robber. It took the investigator a long time to establish their identities, because the bodies of the boys' parents were severely mutilated. A funeral was held soon after. Ethan's only blood relative was his uncle, who together with his wife adopted him. Soon after moving in with them, his life became like hell. Alex and Chloe were F-rank losers, so they tied Ethan up and took out their anger on him by beating him senseless. To hide the signs of beatings, he had to constantly wear a warm, shabby sweater with long sleeves. One day, during recess, a classmate approached him, asking if it was too hot for him to constantly wear a photo. Ethan did not have time to answer because a girl appeared at the door, hurrying her friend. A classmate invited the boy to go to the store with them. Lowering his head, he replied that he was not hungry. Then the girl said that in that case, she would call him next time. When she left the class, Ethan heard her friend say that it was better not to approach him because he had no money, which is why he constantly wears the same dirty clothes. Immediately after class, he was beaten by other classmates. They demanded that Ethan show them all his ability, but he didn't have it. The children knew this very well, because he was the only one in the whole school who had not awakened it. They argued their attacks by saying that they simply wanted to help him awaken it in this way. Ethan couldn't do anything and just endured their constant bullying. To receive less from his guardians, he began to return home later. One such day, our hero was walking past the playground when he suddenly heard a rustling in the bushes. The next moment, a puppy jumped out. Wagging his tail, he walked up to the surprised Ethan. The boy knelt down and began petting the puppy. He responded by licking his neck with his rough tongue, making Ethan laugh from the tickling. From that day on, he began playing late at night with Jimmy on this site. This continued until one day his uncle went looking for his nephew, worried that he might be considered a bad parent. Ethan was very scared when he saw his uncle angry. Catching the emotions of her owner, Jimmy got out of the house that our hero was building for her and began to bark at the man. Alex looked at the puppy with disgust, asking if this is why Ethan comes home so late. The next moment, the man noticed that passers-by began to whisper and look at him disapprovingly. As he got closer to Ethan, he said that he could take this puppy to their home. Hearing this, the boy began to beam with joy, not believing that he was allowed something like that. That evening, he stayed up late with his new friend, reading him a book. When his irritated uncle asked why Ethan was still awake, the boy shuddered in fear. Hastily apologizing, he turned off the light in his room. The next day, Ethan approached his uncle, who was watching a football game, and asked if he could go outside to play with Jimmy, who waved his hand towards the exit, saying that he could do whatever he wanted. The boy beamed with joy. After that, he and his friend walked towards the exit to the street. Sometime later, they came to the playground where they usually played after school. Ethan was really happy that he finally had a friend. The boy did not part with Jimmy for a second, playing various games with him. The puppy also managed to become attached to the boy and followed him everywhere. This day became the happiest in the life of our hero. While playing, Ethan did not notice how quickly time flew by. Seeing that it was already 7 in the evening, he was afraid, knowing that he would be very scolded for being late. Calling Jimmy, the boy ran home. When Ethan returned as expected, he was scolded at the table. Alex asked if he really disrespected them so much that he dared to come home every time after dinner. Lowering his head, the boy apologized, saying that he forgot about the time. The man slammed his beer can on the table, saying that was no excuse. After which he asked irritably whether he would really have to run around looking for Ethan and the neighbors every evening. The boy apologized again, saying that from now on he would be more attentive.